That woman must not be allowed to take my son. She is a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Claire Davis was once the lead radio producer who had molded her husband Richard Hayes's voice into the most trusted morning face on American television. Yet now, facing a bitter divorce, she found herself confronting a husband who was painting her as mentally unstable to strip her of her son. Standing beside Richard were Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the psychiatrist who had fabricated her medical records, and 12 witnesses ready to testify that Claire was a dangerous mother. They all seemed to be speaking from their own experiences, but to Claire's trained ears, the structure of their sentences and even their breathing patterns were far too identical. And 7-year-old Leo, while looking at his mother, took a step back to hide behind his father. In the waiting area outside the family court mediation room, Richard's voice was excessively crisp, even without a microphone. He spoke in the low, soothing baritone he had practiced thousands of times in front of the cameras. That woman must not be allowed to take my son. She is a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Claire sat motionless, her fingers resting on her knees. On the long bench opposite her sat Richard's lawyer, Dr. Jenkins, and the 12 witnesses in a neat row. Claire's attorney, now, Marcus Thorne, whispered quietly, "Do not react. That is exactly what he wants right now." Instead of answering, Claire swallowed her breath in 4 slow intervals. Only on the 4th breath did she realize her fingernails were digging deep into her palms. Seeing her silence, Richard arranged his face into a mask of pity. "Do you see this?" She stays completely silent like that, and then she suddenly starts screaming. "I have tried to protect my wife for a very long time." The moment Claire heard that sentence, a chill ran down the back of her neck. That was the exact rhetorical structure Richard frequently used on his broadcasts. First, frame yourself as the victim, then act like a concerned party worrying about the opponent, and finally, lead the audience to draw the conclusion for you. Claire was the one who had taught him that structure over many years. She was the one who had personally marked his scripts, noting which word required a breath to build trust, and which pause needed a downward glance to convey sincerity. "Mr. Hayes, please do not speak directly to the opposing party until the proceedings officially begin." A court clerk issued a quiet warning, but Richard merely offered an apologetic smile. Dr. Jenkins, organizing a stack of folders beside him, glanced at Claire. There was no hostility or mockery in her gaze. Rather, it held the calm, detached pity of a doctor observing a patient. That expression shook Claire even more. Jenkins was once the person who would hand Claire a glass of warm water, telling her she needed to rest. On days when Claire's hands trembled from pulling all-nighters in the editing bay, Richard would pick up her prescription bags instead, and Jenkins had described his actions as sweet, protective care. The door opened, and the first witness was called. It was Mrs. Miller, the housekeeper who had managed their household chores for a long time. Keeping her eyes averted from Claire, she placed her hands neatly on her lap. I have seen Claire Davis fail to control her emotions in front of the child on several occasions. When the mediator asked for specific situations, she briefly licked her lips. For the emotional safety of the child, I believe it is better for him to stay with his father. Claire picked up her pen and drew a line under that sentence. For the emotional safety of the child. It was an excessively polished phrase. When describing Leo's moods in the past, Mrs. Miller would usually say the boy was startled or got his feelings hurt. She had never once used the phrase emotional safety. The second witness was a middle-aged woman who lived in the same luxury Manhattan apartment building. She testified that she saw Claire slam the shoe cabinet doors 3 times in the hallway. The child was nearby at the time, and I was deeply concerned for the emotional safety of the child. The third was Richard's private driver. After stating that Claire had once cried and pounded on the car window, he repeated the exact same words. For the emotional safety of the child, he must be protected by his father. The fourth was a junior writer from the broadcasting network. He testified that Claire had raised her voice while slamming a coffee mug down during a meeting. Then, a beat late, as if waiting for a cue sign, he tacked on the identical phrase. Claire stopped her pen and stared at Richard across the room. Whenever a witness stalled mid-sentence, Richard would move his right index finger just a fraction of an inch. It was the exact habit he used in the television studio to signal the anchor desk to move to the next paragraph on the teleprompter. Claire knew that tiny movement better than anyone. Richard was a man who could not let go of his script even when the cameras were off. When Claire fixed her gaze on him, he immediately hid his hand in his pocket. Marcus jotted a quick note on his legal pad. "What did you notice?" Instead of writing an answer, Claire circled the identical sentence in all 4 testimonies. The 4 circles looked like a single gaping hole on the paper. Someone was forcing these people's memories into the exact same mold. The 5th witness was a daycare teacher who had briefly looked after Leo. She claimed Claire was overly obsessed with her son. If the child cried, she tried to take him away immediately and could not entrust him to anyone else. Claire closed her eyes briefly at those words. It was the day after Leo, then 4 years old, had been rushed to the emergency room with a high fever. The child was crying for his mother, and Claire had halted a scheduled production meeting to rush to him. Richard was about to go on live television at the time, and did not answer his phone. The teacher knew this context. Yet, in the written statement, there was no mention of the fever, the hospital, or the unreachable father. The only image left was of a neurotic mother who could not let go of her child. "Do you remember that the child was sick at the time?" Marcus asked. The teacher blinked and glanced toward Richard. "I do not remember the exact details." "Did you draft this statement yourself?" The teacher bit her lip. "The situation was explained to me, and I reviewed the summarized document." Marcus did not press further and set his papers down. Richard's lawyer interjected immediately. "It is perfectly natural for a layperson to have their statement formatted into a legal document by a professional." Hearing this, Claire moved her pen again. "The situation was explained, and I reviewed the summarized document. Someone asked the questions, someone selected the memories, and someone polished the final draft with identical phrasing. The statements did not possess their own individual voices." The 6th witness was a relative of Claire's. He testified that after getting married, Claire rarely attended family gatherings and often ignored phone calls. She cut people off of her own accord. Claire felt her shoulders stiffen. She was not the one who had cut off contact. Claiming his broadcasting schedule was erratic, Richard had taken control of the family group chats on his own phone, insisting he would reply on her behalf whenever she was tired. Eventually, the relatives came to believe Claire was too busy, overly sensitive, and simply did not want to be contacted. When she once tried to change the passcode on her new phone, Richard had asked if she was starting to keep secrets from her husband. That question was always followed by a long, freezing silence. The 7th and 8th witnesses offered similar accounts. One claimed to have seen Claire crying in the parking garage, while the other said they heard the sounds of her vomiting in the network restroom. Neither of them knew what had happened before or after those moments. Yet, the ends of their statements were astonishingly precise. The emotional safety of the child. Unpredictable emotions. A father who needs to protect him. Claire could visually see the shape of the sentences through her ears. The opening words varied, but the breathing rhythm in the middle was identical, and their voices all dropped in pitch at the exact same point when transitioning to the final conclusion. This was not the result of someone asking them to state the facts. It was the trace of someone coaching them on exactly what emotions the listener was supposed to feel. Claire used to teach this very habit when editing scripts in the radio production booth. Listeners trust the rhythm before they trust the facts. If similar sentences are repeated, they sound like memories, and if the same conclusion emerges from multiple voices, people mistakenly believe they reached that conclusion themselves. She had utilized that technique to deliver complex information clearly on the morning news. Now, Richard was using that same technique to erase a person's character. The cruelest part was not that the person being erased was his wife, but that the person who had taught him the technique was Claire herself. Marcus lightly pressed the back of her hand. "Are you all right?" Claire nodded like a liar. The 9th witness was an employee from the network's scheduling department. He stated that on a Thursday night last year, Claire had screamed and shoved equipment in a conference room. Mr. Hayes barely managed to calm her down. Inside Claire's mind, the dates and times automatically clicked together. If it was a Thursday night last autumn, she was in charge of a live remote broadcast in Boston. There were days she physically could not have been in a New York conference room. Claire immediately opened her calendar to verify the date. The witness had claimed he could not remember the exact date, but the written statement specified the second Thursday of the month. On that day, Claire had directed a 2-hour live broadcast, personally conducting the audience participation segment. Dozens of staff members and audience members had seen her. Claire opened her mouth for the first time. "I was not in New York on that day." Richard's lawyer immediately looked up. "The specific date has not been conclusively established." Ignoring him, Claire looked directly at the witness and asked, "What color sweater was I wearing?" The witness looked flustered. "I believe it was black." "And what color were the walls in that conference room?" "They were gray." Claire slowly let out a breath. The scheduling department's conference room had been closed for renovations for 6 months prior to that date, and its walls were painted navy blue. The gray conference room, the witness described, was the one located right next to the studio where Richard anchored his show. Marcus tried to take over the questioning, but Claire raised her hand to stop him. If they pushed too hard, too fast, the witnesses would only remember the volume of her voice. "I might be remembering it wrong." The witness muttered softly. Claire nodded. "That is possible. Human memory is fallible, after all." She pointed to the date on the written statement. "However, someone wrote this document with absolute precision." The air in the room momentarily solidified. Dr. Jenkins did not change her expression, but the hand flipping through her files froze. Richard leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Claire, do not corner people again." Hidden within those words was an old command. If you question things, it is an attack, and if I define things, it is protection. Claire looked Richard straight in the eye. "I was not asking you." Her voice was low but unwavering. The mediator declared a brief recess. Stepping out into the hallway, Richard checked to make sure there were no reporters before approaching Claire. Marcus stepped between them, but Richard smiled smoothly. "I do not understand why you are holding out like this. If you think about Leo, quietly getting treatment is the right thing to do." Claire noticed the knot of his tie was slightly crooked. Richard was a man who checked his tie knot 3 times before going on air. Right now, he was anxious. Claire spoke. "If I need treatment, I will get it. But I will not accept it under the diagnosis you wrote for me." Richard's smile vanished for a second. "Do not make me say you are having delusions again." "Did you make the witnesses practice that line too?" "Doctor." Jenkins approached and stood between them. "Claire, this is not the time to react emotionally." Claire stared at her. "Do not diagnose my emotions. You are not my doctor today." Jenkins' eyes grew cold for the first time. "I am someone who worries about the safety of the child." The moment Claire heard that sentence, she felt the exact same rhythm again. The safety of the child. Emotional safety. A father who needs to protect him. Every sentence was packaged neatly like the title of a television program. Claire wanted to ask back. "If you were truly worried about the child, why is Leo's voice completely absent from any of these documents?" But she kept her mouth shut. For now, she needed records more than she needed questions. Marcus led Claire into an empty consultation room and closed the door. "You did well just now. But from now on, I will ask the questions." Claire spread the copies of the witness statements out on the desk. All 12 of them were drafted by the same person. The mere fact that they received help drafting a legal document is not enough to prove manipulation. It is not just the sentences that are the same. The breathing pauses are identical. The speed at which they transition to the conclusion is the same, and their timing for looking at Richard when asked an unfavorable question is identical. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Claire used her pen to slash and mark the sentences. "This is not testimony. It is a cue sheet." Someone handed out different anecdotes to each person and linked them all to the exact same conclusion. "Can you show that objectively?" Marcus asked. Claire stopped before answering. Her years of broadcast production experience allowed her to feel the pattern, but a feeling was not evidence in a courtroom. "We need the original draft files and the drafting process. We have to find out who created the very first draft, where the files came from, and if there is a revision history." Marcus nodded. "I will request those. In the meantime, Claire, organize every date you can remember." especially the ones we can verify through broadcast logs. Claire folded a corner of a statement, and Richard gave them a signal with his finger. Marcus's expression hardened. Are you certain? I am the one who created that signal. After the recess, the remaining witnesses came in. The 10th was their building's doorman. The 11th was Richard's stylist. The last was a freelance segment writer who had worked with Claire. The doorman claimed Claire had come out of the building at dawn, crying. The stylist said Claire had tried to cut Richard's broadcast suits with scissors. The segment writer testified that Claire had deleted the program scripts, consumed by jealousy over Richard's success. At that final statement, Claire finally felt her stomach churn. That script was written by her. She had merely deleted the factually incorrect portions from the draft Richard had submitted under his own name. Yet, the official record only retained the image of a jealous wife, sabotaging her husband's career. Who was the original author of that script? Claire asked. The segment writer avoided her gaze. It was shared under anchor Richard Hayes's name. Did you check the file history? I only looked at the content. Then you would not even know if the section I supposedly deleted was my own writing. Richard's lawyer raised an objection, and the mediator requested that questions be routed through Marcus. Claire bit the inside of her lip and backed down. She finally understood why Richard had stripped her of her career first. If Claire had remained a lead producer, the file editing logs and the meeting attendees would have lent power to her words. But now, she just looked like a former employee who could not stomach her husband's success, out of jealousy. When the testimonies concluded, the mediator asked both sides for a brief closing statement. Richard leaned forward as if he had been waiting. I do not want to tear my child away from his mother. I only want to protect Leo until Claire has fully recovered. His voice trembled ever so slightly on the last word. It was a calculated tremor. Claire had recorded and filtered out that exact tremor dozens of times in the past. Some versions sounded too much like acting, and others lacked emotion. What Richard was using right now was the third version Claire had selected for him a long time ago. The tone that sounded to people like responsible sorrow. She suddenly felt as though a blade she had crafted with her own hands was now pressing against her throat. Marcus yielded the floor for Claire to speak. She did not pull out the sentences she had prepared. I am not a perfect person. There were times I lost my temper, and times I set things down while crying. The corners of Richard's mouth twitched upward slightly. Claire continued, but the stories we heard today have severed all the context before and after my actions. Rushing to my sick child became an obsession, and correcting a script I wrote became jealousy. I will not avoid evaluation. I will undergo an independent psychological assessment. In return, please verify exactly who created and how they revised the materials being used to judge me. The room fell silent. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he now understood why she had discarded her prepared remarks. The mediator stated that a conclusion would not be made today. Additional documents and independent evaluations were required, and in the meantime, Leo's current living arrangement was highly likely to be maintained. Only that last sentence echoed in Claire's ears. The child continues to live with the father. Richard could not hide his relieved expression. Closing her files, Dr. Jenkins spoke to Claire. If you cooperate, you can find stability much faster. Claire did not answer. She wondered since when the word stability had become synonymous with submission. She picked up her bag and walked out into the hallway. Marcus was explaining their next schedule and the list of required documents from behind. But all of Claire's attention was stolen by the sound of small sneakers approaching from afar. At the end of the hallway, Leo was walking toward them with a court worker. The 7-year-old boy wore a black smartwatch on his wrist. Claire had bought it for his 5th birthday. After a brief incident where he had gotten lost at an amusement park, she had taught him that holding down the side button would send an SOS signal to his mother. Leo had pressed it multiple times back then like a game, and Claire had laughed, telling him he should only use it when he was truly scared. Right now, the boy was tightly gripping that wrist with his other hand. Claire stopped walking and lowered her body. Leo. The boy's eyes wavered for a moment. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Richard approached from behind and placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. The child's body stiffened ever so slightly. Claire did not miss that reaction. The words "I missed you so much" rose to her throat, but she swallowed them. Instead, she asked, "How was school today?" Leo nodded, his head still under Richard's hand. Claire tried to take a step closer, but the worker cautiously blocked her. "This is all we can allow for today." Claire stopped. Staring at his mother, Leo spoke clearly, as if reciting a memorized line. "I need to be emotionally safe." In that instant, the voices of the 12 witnesses echoed back through the child's mouth. Claire's vision blurred momentarily. Concealing a satisfied look, Richard stroked his son's back. "Good boy. Let's go." Just before turning around, Leo looked at Claire one more time. In his eyes, fear preceded any trace of hatred. Claire clung to that truth. The possibility that her child did not hate her, but was simply terrified of losing something. However, before she could even call his name, Leo took a step back to hide behind his father. And he shoved the watch on his wrist, deep inside his sleeve. As Richard took the boy into the elevator, Claire watched through the closing doors as Leo's tiny fist completely wrapped around the watch until the very end. The morning after leaving the mediation room, Claire Davis's name had not yet hit the trending searches on the national portals, but it was already spreading faster than any news article through the cell phones of the broadcasting network staff. No one explicitly detailed the case. Instead, the whispers were all the same. "I heard she hasn't been well lately. I heard she's taking a leave because of her kid." The same sentences drifted through the cracks of conference room doors and inside elevators. When Claire received a call from the National Broadcasting Network's HR department, she heard them say they were putting her return to work review on indefinite hold, even before asking about the court's decision. The reason was singular: a personal dispute that could negatively impact the company's image. After hanging up, Claire stood by the window for a long time. The face reflected in the glass looked far more exhausted than she remembered. Leo's voice from the day before, saying "I need to be emotionally safe," kept repeating in her head. It was not the speech pattern of a child. The intonation and breathing were identical to Richard's when he memorized a script right before a broadcast. Even so, the moment she heard it, Claire was shaken by the thought that she might have truly been the one making her child anxious. She finally understood that when someone repeatedly feeds you lies, the first thing you begin to doubt is not the other person, but your own memory. Marcus Thorne arrived at Claire's temporary apartment just after 10 in the morning. He placed his laptop and a thick manila envelope on the dining table and spoke immediately. "From today on, route all communications through me. Do not contact the witnesses directly, and do not make angry calls to the network." Claire offered a cold smile. "If I stay quiet, their lies become the truth." Marcus did not avoid her gaze. "I am not telling you to stay quiet. I am telling you to leave a paper trail. If you act on emotion, the other side will just cut that specific reaction out and submit it again." Claire could not reply. She already knew exactly how that mechanism worked. Marcus spread out the copies of the witness statements secured the day before. Beneath the names of the 12 individuals were rows of identical vocabulary: unpredictable emotions, the emotional safety of the child, an environment that requires protection. Claire traced the sentences with her finger and said, "This is a vocabulary list created by one person." Everyone used phrases they do not normally use in their daily lives, and in the exact same sequence. Marcus nodded but remained cautious. A pattern can raise suspicion, but to prove manipulation, we need the drafting process. Who created the files? Who edited them? And where were they printed? Claire stared at the 12 sheets of paper. The statement that digital footprints could be more honest than human memory sounded bitterly ironic. The cell phone sitting on the edge of the dining table chimed. Claire checked the screen and frowned. It was an alert from the bank. A notification stating that access privileges to the joint family account had been altered, followed by a message that several automatic transfers had been halted. She immediately opened the banking app, but her passcode was rejected. She entered it once, twice, 3 times, but the screen locked her out. After they got married, Richard had insisted it was easier for him to manage the finances, consolidating their joint digital access under his control. Citing her busy production schedule, Claire had handed it over, only checking the monthly living expenses she needed. Now, that habit had returned, like a noose tightening around her neck. "Check your credit cards too," Marcus said. Claire pulled the joint family card from her wallet and went down to the corner bodega. She placed bottled water and some basic groceries on the counter, but the transaction was declined. The clerk handed the card back with an awkward expression. Feeling the stares of the people in line behind her, Claire dug for another card. Her personal account only held a fraction of her last network paycheck. Walking back to the apartment, she gripped the handles of her grocery bags far too tightly for a long time. Richard did not need to use physical violence to push someone out of their own home. The person holding all the money, the passcodes, and the narrative simply had to lock the door. Claire almost hung up 3 times while calling Rachel, a friend from college. Admitting the fact that she had been locked out of her own joint accounts was much harder than asking to borrow money. Rachel wired the necessary funds without prying for reasons, but at the end, she asked carefully, "Why didn't you say anything all this time?" Claire could not answer. Richard always made her friends feel uncomfortable, and she had believed it was better not to explain the friction if she wanted to protect her marriage. Isolation was not a prison built overnight. It was a wall she had stacked brick by brick, thinking she was keeping the peace. The moment Claire stepped inside the apartment, she started typing on her phone that she had never sabotaged her husband's success, that her production credits and program development logs were still fully intact, that the rumors currently spreading were entirely false. Her sentences were fast and precise. Her years of skill in explaining complex events to radio listeners came alive at her fingertips. In the last line, she wrote, "I have never refused medical treatment, nor have I ever put my child in danger." Her finger hovered over the post button. She could perfectly imagine which parts of this text Richard would crop out once he saw it. Marcus watched her without saying a word. "If I post this now, will people believe me?" Claire asked. Marcus answered honestly. "Some will believe it, and some will be even more suspicious. But what matters is not who believes you more. It is that Leo could be exposed even further." Claire looked down at the screen. Nowhere in the text had she mentioned her child's name, but people would instantly dig up his school, his photos, and the broadcasts. Richard treated their family like content, and she wanted to stop that cycle. Claire copied the text, saved it to a private document, and closed the app. Silence felt like defeat, but this time, it had to be a silence that shielded her child, not one that hid her away. That night, after returning home, Claire waited for the designated time she was allowed to call Leo. Richard answered, but claimed the boy was too tired and pushed the call back. When Claire begged just to hear his voice, Richard sighed. "You want me to wake the kid up just to soothe your anxiety?" The call promptly ended. Claire berated herself for failing to turn on the recording function, then stopped. If she started turning every conversation into evidence, she felt she too would begin viewing her child's life solely as a case file. Instead, she typed the exact time of the call and Richard's exact words into a dated document. In the afternoon, a consultation was scheduled with an independent psychiatrist arranged by Marcus. Arriving outside the hospital building, Claire paused her steps. The white walls and the smell of antiseptic reminded her of Dr. Jenkins's office. Jenkins always spoke in a low voice, and whenever Claire expressed discomfort, Jenkins would explain that her judgment might be clouded at the moment. At some point, Claire began seeking Jenkins's interpretation before trusting her own emotions. She would ask if she was being overly sensitive when angry, if she was depressed when tired, or if she was being paranoid when doubting her husband. The more she asked, the more her own vocabulary shrank. The new specialist neither promised a diagnosis nor vowed to prove her innocence. He began by methodically asking about her current sleep, diet, memory, anxiety levels, and work performance. Trying to answer every question precisely, Claire stuttered and stopped several times. She was terrified of admitting when she didn't know something. Whenever she paused, the specialist did not rush her. "My goal today is not to take anyone's side. We are simply checking if your current state aligns with the past records." The statement was strangely ordinary, but in the face of that normalcy, Claire felt like she was going to cry. Claire could not remember the names of all the medications she had taken. Richard usually managed the prescription bags, and on busy days, he would simply place the pills in her hand with a glass of water. The specialist did not try to guess the names. Instead, He explained that he needed to formally request and review the pharmacy logs and the actual medical files. He also added that while certain medications could cause drowsiness or a lack of focus depending on the person, he could not declare a definitive cause without the records. Claire found his caution so different from Dr. Jenkins that it felt unfamiliar. Jenkins always wore an expression that suggested she already knew the answer before Claire even finished her question. After the session ended, the specialist was reviewing a few pages of her past record copies when his eyes stopped. There seems to be a significant amount of your husband's observations reflected in here. Claire gripped the armrests of her chair. More than my own words. Avoiding a direct comparison, he explained. In certain logs, the guardian's descriptions are written out much longer than the content of your actual consultation. We will need to verify the context of those times. Claire looked at the phrases on the paper. Midnight impulses. Aggressive language. Excessive reactions in front of the child. None of it was completely unfamiliar, but they lacked all context before and after. It was as if someone had cherry-picked the most broken moments of her life and compiled them to represent her entirety. Coming out of the hospital, Claire had a text from Marcus. David Clark, the audio engineer from the network's tech team, wanted to meet her. The location was not near the broadcasting network, but an old vintage record cafe in Brooklyn. Claire hesitated briefly. David was a sound engineer she had worked with for over 10 years, yet he had said nothing when she was pushed out of her own program. Even when Richard overturned Claire's decisions in meetings and gave direct orders to the junior staff, David had just stared at his mixing console. That silence lingered like a betrayal. But right now, what Claire needed was not a flawless ally, but someone who held unerased records. In a corner booth of the cafe, David pulled out 2 battered external hard drives and a manila envelope. His hands moved slower than usual. These are not official network files. They are my personal project backups. Claire asked immediately. Why bring these now? David lowered his eyes. Back then, Richard was the face of the network, and everyone believed the narrative that you needed psychological treatment. I pretended to believe it too, Claire spoke coldly. You didn't pretend to believe it. You just stayed silent. David did not make excuses. You're right. That's why there's something you need to verify, even if it's late. He pulled out last year's broadcasting schedule and the recording booth access logs from the envelope. The external hard drives contained the raw audio files and meeting recordings from the programs Claire had produced. David explained that the duration of the audio files Richard had submitted did not match the raw files. The submitted files are mostly short. They only contain the parts where you are crying or raising your voice. The raw files contain everything that was said leading up to those moments. Claire put on the headphones. In the first file, her voice sounded exhausted but entirely logical. She pointed out an error in the promotional copy, and even after the meeting concluded, Richard kept repeating the same aggressive questions, cornering her. The submitted version began the exact second after Richard's final question ended. It only retained the moment Claire finally snapped and screamed at him to stop. The second recording was even more unsettling. Claire was speaking very slowly, forgetting her words multiple times. In a voice dripping with mock concern, Richard said, I will take over for you today. Right after that, Richard pitched the exact program proposal Claire had created, presenting it under his own name. At the time, Claire had genuinely believed she was losing her competence. David played another file from the morning of that exact same day. Just 3 hours prior, Claire was flawlessly resolving an unexpected live broadcast crisis, coordinating the schedules of 2 guests, and giving crystal clear directions on the headset. Listening to the stark contrast between the 2 files, Claire's hands froze. Her condition was so drastically different that it was hard to believe it was the same person on the same day. How many days were like this? Claire asked. David unfolded a spreadsheet he had prepared. I verified 9 separate occasions. In the morning, you directed the broadcasts perfectly normal, but in the afternoon or evening meetings, your speech suddenly slowed down, or your memory clouded. And in almost every case, Richard took over your duties starting the following week. Claire read the dates one by one. Some days were followed by consultations with Dr. Jenkins, and some were the days Richard had handed her pills with water. But she did not jump to hasty conclusions. She needed to verify if it was the medication, sleep deprivation, or stress. The crucial point was that the symptoms did not appear randomly, but were recorded precisely at the moments that benefited someone else. David hesitated before playing the last file. This one might be hard for you to hear. In the recording, Richard was on the phone with someone outside the studio booth. His voice was low, and the name wasn't audible. She couldn't focus again today. I'll just take over next week's meeting. When the person on the other end asked something, Richard laughed. I'm keeping a continuous log of it. We might need it later. The call ended there. Claire couldn't take off the headphones. She couldn't definitively prove what Richard was plotting based on the audio alone. But he didn't sound like a man hoping for his wife's recovery. He sounded like someone eagerly waiting for her collapse to become useful. After leaving the cafe, Claire headed straight for Marcus's office. The three of them stayed up late into the night, aligning the dates. Broadcast logs, building access records, credit card statements, hospital visits, the programs Richard took over, and the incidents detailed in the witness statements were laid out line by line. Claire covered an entire wall with sticky notes, like an old-school production storyboard. Red notes for the days her symptoms were logged, blue for broadcast materials, and black for when Richard's duties expanded. A few hours later, a repeating pattern emerged on the wall. The day after Claire faltered, Richard's name grew larger on the credits, and the days she recovered, a new consultation record magically appeared. Marcus cautioned Claire, "It is dangerous to claim he tampered with your medication based solely on this pattern. The other side will argue it was due to exhaustion and stress." Claire nodded. "I am not definitively claiming a cause yet either. But I can show that the medical records are not objective." She opened the copies of Dr. Jenkins's medical logs again. Some sentences explicitly stated according to the husband, but in other sections, the source of the information had been erased. It was formatted as if Jenkins had directly observed the facts herself. Marcus said he would file a request for the original documents and the edit history. Staring at the tiny timestamps on the margins of the documents, Claire suddenly pulled one specific page out. The log stated that on the evening of the second Thursday of November last year, Claire had shown extreme anxiety and a loss of reality testing in the consultation room. It even included a sentence stating the specialist had observed this directly. Claire checked the date multiple times. That day, she was not in New York. She was on location for a live remote broadcast in Boston. She had started rehearsals at 3:00 p.m. and ran the live broadcast from 6:00 p.m. to 8:00 p.m. There were hundreds of people in the audience, alongside local crew members and on-air talent. Claire immediately texted David to request the raw files from that day. Minutes later, the video and the full audio arrived. On the screen, she was standing in the center of the stage, giving sharp, clear cues. Marcus looked back and forth between the medical log and the video, asking, "Is there any chance this was a remote telehealth consultation?" Claire retraced her steps from that day. During rehearsals, she had handed her phone to a production assistant, and after the broadcast, she was in a meeting with the talent. There might have been a brief phone call, but it certainly did not align with a record claiming she was directly observed in a clinic. She paused the video and zoomed in on the time code displayed on the screen. At that exact same hour, the medical log stated that Dr. Jenkins had observed Claire's facial expressions and physical tics for an extended period. The distance between the two cities could not be erased by a simple explanation. Claire felt her fingertips go cold. For the first time, the lies tripped not over emotions, but over time. Claire could not feel happy. The fact that the record was forged could save her, but it simultaneously meant someone had intentionally rewritten her entire life. She recalled calling Richard after the live broadcast ended that night. With a sweet voice, Richard had told her she sounded exhausted and should take her medication and sleep. Arriving at her hotel room, Claire had opened the pill packet he had packed for her in advance. The next morning, she was late for a crucial network meeting, and Richard attended in her place. At the time, she believed her husband had stepped in to help her. Now, every scene of his help began taking on an entirely different meaning. Sliding the documents into an envelope, Marcus spoke. This single record will not tear down their entire case. But it can force them to reveal the original files and the exact process of how they were drafted. That is exactly what we need. Claire stared at the red sticky notes covering the wall. The image of Leo hiding his watch in the courthouse hallway the day before flashed in her mind. Her child was already living inside the sentences crafted by adults. She could no longer fight, using just her memories. Exact times, original files, who saw what, and who wrote it down. She had to reclaim them one by one. Holding the forged medical record in her hand, Claire spoke quietly. From now on, I am going to find out exactly who edited my voice. Just before they left the office, Marcus's paralegal handed Claire a small envelope. Inside was a list of supplemental evidence submitted by the court. Richard's legal team had submitted the record of an in-person consultation with Dr. H.D. Jenkins on the exact day Claire was doing the live broadcast as a core piece of evidence. Claire checked the signatures at the bottom of the list. Next to Dr. Jenkins's name, Richard's signature was clearly signed in the Guardian verification box. The two of them hadn't just blindly believed the same story. They had written the exact same lie on the exact same timeline. As the elevator doors closed, Claire clutched the envelope to her chest. Finally, she was holding not a wavering memory, but an immovable date. Claire woke up before 5:00 a.m. She had slept for less than 2 hours, but the date she had verified the day before remained razor-sharp in her mind. The live remote broadcast in Boston at 6:00 p.m. And the record stating she was directly observed in a New York clinic at the exact same hour. She taped a massive sheet of butcher paper to her living room wall and divided the past 12 months into weeks. Blue for broadcast schedules, red for consultations and medication, black for programs Richard took over, and yellow for any incident involving Leo. The empty wall quickly transformed into an editing bay that deconstructed one person's life. Claire Davis was naturally gifted at arranging complex events into chronological order. If a live broadcast disaster happened, she could remember exactly who was seconds late, which mic cut out first, and exactly where a guest's talking point shifted, just from hearing it once. However, arranging her own life was different. Memories were tethered to emotions, and those emotions were glued to the interpretations Richard had assigned them. The days she cried became hypersensitivity, and the days she said she wanted to rest were documented as lethargy. Claire added one sentence next to every incident. Who benefited that day? The first pattern emerged faster than expected. The day after Claire was documented as speaking slowly in an afternoon meeting, Richard stepped into her pitch meeting in her place. The week it was logged that she showed severe anxiety symptoms, Richard took over not only the hosting duties of the program but also the executive production decisions. 2 weeks later, internal network memos described him as the de facto showrunner. Beneath that memo, Claire wrote the date and attached the creation timestamp of the original pitch file she had written. The concept for the program had started with her, but as the records of her instability multiplied, Richard's name grew larger. The second pattern surfaced in the 12 witness statements. Claire color-coded every sentence. The description of the event was green, the emotional judgment was orange, and the conclusion was purple. The witnesses spoke of different locations and time frames, but the structural anatomy of their statements was shockingly identical. First, they briefly presented Claire's behavior. Next, they speculated on the potential impact on the child. And finally, they shifted to the conclusion that the father was the safer option. It was the exact 3-act structure used in broadcast scripts to guide listeners toward a specific emotion. Laying the 12 sheets on the floor, Claire spoke to herself. This isn't memory. It's a format. Arriving in the morning, Marcus Thorne stared at the wall and the floor for a long time. Claire explained how the same conjunctions were repeated across different statements, and even the exact timing of when the witnesses glanced at Richard after a tough question. Marcus did not express awe. Instead, he asked coldly, "Can a third party replicate this analysis?" Claire paused. As a broadcast producer, the pattern I feel is undeniable. We must convert that feeling into objective data. File creation logs, revision histories, routing paths. We need evidence that an identical master draft existed. Claire nodded. Expertise was just the starting line. It couldn't be the verdict. The two first mapped out how each witness was contacted. They categorized who received a personal call from Richard, who went through the network's legal team, and who submitted statements after being referred to Dr. Jenkins's family support program. Astonishingly, 9 out of the 12 were linked to a group schedule managed by Richard's agent. 3 had previously participated in counseling programs run by Dr. Jenkins. Claire wanted to contact them immediately, but Marcus stopped her. The moment you ask them directly, it can be misconstrued as intimidation. For now, we will file a formal preservation of evidence request. Claire gritted her teeth. The phrase process over speed had never felt so suffocating. To verify internal network documents, Claire reached out to Chloe Bennett, a junior producer she used to work with. Chloe hesitated at first, but agreed to meet after Claire reminded her that she was the senior producer who had helped her get back on her feet in the past. The two sat across from each other in a small diner far from the network building. Chloe revealed that Richard had been in frequent contact with the scheduling team recently, and even before Claire's return to work review began, he had warned them that her family issues could make the production environment unstable. Claire asked carefully, "Can you access the files for my old project?" Chloe bit her lip and replied that it might be possible. Marcus made it absolutely clear to Chloe that she should not attempt any illegal copying or unauthorized account access. All they needed was the creator metadata and revision history that could be verified within her authorized clearance level. Chloe nodded, but her face was pale. Claire recognized her junior colleague's terror, but could not bring herself to stop. "Just check the exact timestamp when my name was erased. I'm not even asking you to find out who altered the original drafts." After a long pause, Chloe spoke. "Claire, if I help you with this, my career at the network could be over too." Only then did Claire realize she was trying to trade someone else's livelihood for her evidence. That afternoon, Claire sent Chloe a text telling her not to push herself any further. However, before the message even arrived, Chloe had already contacted Richard's agent. Terrified she would be fired if the data request was discovered, she believed that explaining the situation first would grant her protection. Richard was not surprised. He told Chloe that Claire was manipulating the people around her again, and asked her to document the contents of their text messages and the exact time they met. Chloe felt the request was bizarre, but could not refuse. A few hours later, Marcus received a formal complaint from the opposing counsel. They claimed Claire was harassing witnesses and intimidating network staff. As soon as Marcus put down the phone, he asked Claire, "Exactly what did you ask Chloe to do?" Claire recounted the conversation verbatim. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but his tone was rigid. "It wasn't an illegal request. But you just handed the opposing side the exact narrative they wanted. The narrative of an unstable person inciting those around her." Claire tried to argue, then stopped. She had only been trying to find the truth and had no intention of threatening Chloe. But the result was a terrified junior employee running straight to Richard. For the first time, Claire considered how her intentions might have felt like a crushing pressure to others. If she wanted to be different from Richard, she had to change not just her goal, but her methods. The following day, her scheduled brief phone call with Leo was cancelled. Richard's side argued that Claire was escalating the conflict by contacting people around them, which could place an emotional burden on the child. Reading the notice, Claire immediately called Marcus. "This is because of my conversation with Chloe. Leo has absolutely nothing to do with it." Marcus agreed, but explained there was no way to reverse the cancellation instantly. Claire lifted a coffee mug from her dining table, then set it back down. The handle clinked sharply against the saucer. She felt as if even that tiny sound was being recorded by someone. She hid both hands under the table and counted her breaths. At that same hour, Leo was getting into a fight with a classmate in the school cafeteria. Another child, claiming he had overheard his parents talking, told Leo, "Your mom is crazy and had to go to court." Leo tried to ignore it at first, but when the kid added, "That's why your dad is protecting you from her," Leo put down his spoon. He shoved the boy's arm, sending a carton of milk spilling across the floor. When the teachers rushed over, Leo wasn't crying. He was just clutching the watch on his wrist, repeating the same phrase over and over. "My mom is not a bad person." The school contacted both guardians that day. Arriving first, Richard hugged Leo, checking him for injuries. In front of the other teachers, he was the picture of a calm, loving father. However, the moment the counselor's office door closed, his voice dropped. "Why did you say that?" "I told you not to talk about your mother." Leo looked down. "My friend said Mom was bad." Richard sighed and gripped the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me. If you react like that, people will think your mom told you to do it. Then your mom will be in even more trouble." Leo came to believe that by trying to protect his mother, he had actually harmed her. Jessica Ramirez, the school's child advocate and counselor, overheard Richard's last words from outside the door. She didn't intervene immediately, but offered to give Leo some alone time to rest. Richard insisted that his presence was necessary to keep the boy stable, but Jessica cited school policy, explaining she needed a one-on-one session with the child. Left alone in the room, Jessica did not ask about the cause of the fight. Instead, she laid out several emotion cards on the desk. "You can pick a picture that feels close to your heart right now, or you don't have to pick anything at all." Leo hesitated for a long time before placing his finger between the cards for fear and guilt. Jessica did not immediately pry into why he was scared or who he felt guilty toward. Seeing Leo fiddling with his smartwatch, she simply asked, "Does that watch make your heart feel a little safer?" The boy gave a very tiny nod. "Mom told me to press it when I get scared." "You don't have to tell me when you got scared." At Jessica's response, Leo looked at her for the first time. "If I press it, Mom comes." Jessica did not make promises she couldn't guarantee. "An adult will know you asked for help. And those adults have to make sure you are safe." The child pondered that sentence for a long time. The school had also notified Claire, but Richard had already taken the boy home. Claire tried to rush straight to the school, but Marcus told her to call the counselor first to see if a visit was allowed. Over the phone, Jessica explained that Leo wasn't badly hurt and was currently stable. Claire asked in a trembling voice, "If I go there right now, will it help my child?" Jessica paused briefly before replying. "Right now, rather than adults trying to prove who is right, we need the child to feel that expressing his emotions is not an act of betraying someone." Hearing those words, Claire took off her shoes right there in the entryway. That night, Claire did not contact Chloe again. Instead, she added a new line to the document tracking her own actions. "My desperation to secure evidence placed an unfair burden on a junior colleague, and as a result, my contact with Leo was severed." She wrote it not to condemn herself, but to ensure she never repeated the mistake. Richard always masked his actions with the word protection. Claire refused to do the same. Being a victim did not make every choice she made inherently righteous. For the first time, she separately defined the target she needed to defeat and the target she needed to protect. She had to win the war against Richard, but Leo had to remain entirely outside the battlefield. Late that night, David Clark sent Claire a password-protected file. While comparing the submitted audio files against the raw server backups, he had discovered that exactly 17 seconds were missing from one specific file. Claire put on her earphones and toggled between the two versions. The submitted version began with her shoving objects across a desk and screaming, "Just stop it," in the raw file. Right before that moment, Richard was repeatedly asking the same question, in a low, taunting voice. "Do you really think you can raise Leo properly? Do you actually believe you're fit to be a mother?" Every time Claire tried to answer, he cut her off, raising his voice louder. The missing 17 seconds in the raw file didn't justify Claire's actions. She had genuinely lost her temper, and the sound of a mug shattering could be heard in the recording. However, the version Richard submitted entirely erased the cause of the conflict and his own provocation, leaving only her reaction. Claire paused the audio and asked David, "Can you tell exactly when this was edited?" David replied that while file properties alone weren't definitive, there were traces indicating the submitted version had been resaved from the raw file. They needed a formal forensic analysis. Claire relayed this to Marcus. This time, instead of making an emotional public disclosure, she formally requested the preservation and verification of the original files first. The next morning, a call came from an unexpected number. It was Mrs. Dackod Miller, the housekeeper who had been the first to testify the day before. Lowering her voice, she immediately said, "Not everything I said was a lie." Claire did not interrogate her aggressively. "Which parts do you personally remember?" Mrs. Miller confirmed she remembered the day Claire cried in front of the child. However, the written statement omitted the fact that Richard had first snatched Claire's phone away, preventing her from calling her own parents. "The person who drafted it told me that detail wasn't relevant to the case," she said. "Who wrote the statement?" Claire asked, keeping her voice as flat as possible. Mrs. Miller replied that Richard's agent had asked her questions and later showed her the typed document. She admitted she had signed it without reading it thoroughly. Claire asked for permission to record the call. Terrified, Mrs. Miller refused. "If they find out I came forward, I might not get the rest of my severance package." Richard's side was doling out the money they owed her in installments, labeling it as a living support stipend. Claire felt a surge of rage, but she did not demand that Mrs. Miller testify. "You do not have to do anything right now. Just please, do not delete the document or any text messages." After hanging up, Claire realized how easily she had almost judged Mrs. Miller as a coward. The other side held the money and the jobs, and within that power dynamic, the witnesses chose to sell their memories or stay silent. It didn't absolve them of responsibility, but if she didn't understand the structure controlling these people, Richard would simply buy another voice. Marcus explained that without Mrs. Miller's consent, the recorded phone call could not be submitted. Instead, they decided to find a legal avenue to audit her severance payment records and the agent's communication logs. Claire slowed her pace again. Cornering people didn't make the truth come out any faster. In the afternoon, the task of finalizing the evidence from the day of the live broadcast continued. The local production crew confirmed the rehearsal start time, and the stage manager sent the timesheets proving Claire had been on site since early afternoon. Videos from the talent's green room, the broadcast transmission logs, and the radio comms records were all secured. Claire placed Dr. Jenkins's medical record containing the observation notes right next to them. That record stated that Claire had rocked back and forth repeatedly in the consultation chair and failed to answer questions coherently. At that exact same hour, the video showed Claire resolving a stage malfunction and perfectly readjusting the cue order for the guests. Comparing the two documents, Marcus said, "They will highly likely claim there was a simple data entry error regarding the time." Claire nodded. "Then, we have to prove the exact date the author actually saw me. They might pivot and claim it was an observational telehealth session." Claire pulled up her phone records from the day of the live broadcast. During that entire time block, there was only one short call with Richard, and absolutely zero calls with Dr. Jenkins. She remembered the pill packet Richard had sent to her hotel room that night. She had thrown the packet away, but her credit card statement showed a transaction at a nearby pharmacy. It was on Richard's card. Nothing was definitive yet, but the gaps in their records were narrowing. 3 days later, Chloe sent Claire a brief text. "I am so sorry. I told Richard everything." Claire stared at the screen for a long time but did not call her. A few moments later, a second message arrived. It stated that Richard had asked her to document their conversation in writing. Chloe said she didn't want to be involved anymore and had refused to send him the file. Claire felt a simultaneous wave of betrayal and relief. The junior producer had put her in danger, but at the final moment, she stopped short of becoming Richard's witness. Claire replied, "Thank you for letting me know. Don't look for any more files." She also apologized for her own misstep. That evening, a copy of the emotion cards Leo had chosen at school was forwarded by the counselor. It wasn't a legal document, just a brief update meant to be shared with the guardians. The child had chosen fear and guilt, but didn't write down who those feelings were directed toward. Claire left the cards on the dining table and stared at them for a long time. She desperately wanted to find proof that Leo missed her. But that desire, too, could just be a way of interpreting the child's emotions in a direction that benefited her case. Claire wrote absolutely nothing next to the cards. The parts the child hadn't spoken about needed to be left blank. David Clark discovered another fact after further analysis. The 3 audio files Richard submitted were all resaved using the exact same audio editing software, and the file naming convention was identical. While Richard claimed these were independent files collected by different people at different times, There were digital traces showing they had all gone through the exact same computer environment during the final stage. This alone didn't prove who edited them. But it directly contradicted the claim that the 3 files were gathered independently. Claire placed the 12 witness statements next to the 3 audio files. Different people's memories, incidents from different locations, recordings from different devices, all of them looked as though they had passed through a single pair of hands at the very end. Reviewing the materials, Marcus spoke carefully. What we have is not yet definitive proof of fabrication. But we can severely damage the credibility of their evidence, Claire answered. Those people collected only the moments I broke down, but they erased who created those moments. She pressed play on the live broadcast video. On the screen, she was calmly directing the show in front of hundreds of people. At that same hour, the medical record claimed she was losing her grip on reality and couldn't answer questions. One person's body could not exist in 2 places at once. Memories could waver, but transmission logs did not. Finally, Claire zoomed in on the original text of Dr. Jenkins's record. Beneath the phrase directly observed in the consultation room, a tiny revision timestamp was logged. The record was originally created the day after the live broadcast, but the metadata showed the problematic sentence was added weeks later. That revision timestamp perfectly aligned with the exact period Richard had officially seized executive control of Claire's program. Claire printed the revision timestamp and pinned it next to the black sticky notes on the wall. The possibility emerged that the medical record hadn't just listed the wrong date, but was retroactively doctored to fit a specific narrative. Looking at Marcus, she said, "Now, we don't just ask when this record was made, we ask why it was changed later." While Marcus prepared the formal preservation request for the original data, Claire remained alone in the room. The wall was color-coordinated with the past year of her life. The days symptoms were logged, the days Richard's power expanded, the days Jenkins' sentences were added, and the days contact with Leo was restricted, all connected in a single, unbroken line. She accepted the reality that she hadn't simply been betrayed by her husband. Her time, her voice, and her memories had been stolen from her, piece by piece. Yet this time, direction overpowered fear. The story Richard had fabricated looked flawless, but he had forgotten one crucial thing. You can edit a broadcast, but you cannot change the timestamp of a live feed. Dr. Jenkins's written response arrived sooner than expected. Regarding the discrepancy in the dates, Jenkins explained that the time of the consultation and the time of the data entry might have gotten mixed up during the logging process. She also claimed the phrase direct observation did not exclusively mean an in-person session, but was a comprehensive clinical judgment factoring in phone calls and Guardian reports. Marcus Thorne read the document to the end and tightened his lips. She changed her phrasing. She's spinning a record that explicitly said, directly observed, into a comprehensive judgment. Claire looked down at the highlighted revisions on the paper. A lie doesn't disappear when it gets caught, it just dresses up in more professional vocabulary. The opposing side counterattacked, claiming Claire was obsessing over trivial clerical errors in the records. Their logic was that even if a date or 2 was incorrect, the overarching narrative that she repeatedly failed to control her emotions remained unchanged. In a supplemental brief, Richard's lawyer wrote that Claire was expanding her victim mentality by suspecting medical professionals and witnesses. Reading that sentence, Claire almost laughed. Pointing out that records didn't match was labeled as paranoia, while staying silent was taken as an admission of guilt. Whichever path she chose, the structure was rigged to lead to their predetermined conclusion. She was trapped inside a snare, far more sophisticated than any broadcast script she had ever edited. Marcus warned her again not to respond emotionally. We must show not just that one record is flawed, but why they all keep getting revised in the exact same direction. Claire stared at the timeline on the wall. The date of the live broadcast, Richard's hostile takeover of her program, Jenkins's record revision, and her own forced leave of absence were all linked in a single row. But the other side was isolating each event, claiming it was all just a coincidence. There was a time when Claire's job involved finding the hidden connections in a breaking news disaster that the listeners easily missed. Now, she had to prove those connections in her own life. She had to show them not a single contradiction, but the undeniable trajectory of repeated choices. That afternoon, Richard's side submitted a new piece of audio evidence. The file contained Claire's voice, crying, shoving a glass mug, and screaming, "I'm going to destroy everything exactly the way you want." Richard's lawyer interpreted this outburst as a threat to destroy the child's belongings and family photos. The moment Claire heard the first few seconds, she knew exactly which night it was. It was the night Richard had stolen her pitch deck, submitted it under his own name, and then demanded she delete her original files from her laptop. What Claire had threatened to destroy were not her family or her child's things, but the doctored copies and forged reports. However, in the submitted audio, the entire preceding conversation was gone. David Clark tried to dig up the server backups for that specific date, but some files had already exceeded their retention period and had been automatically purged. The entire beginning of the fight was missing from his personal hard drives as well. He apologized to Claire, but she found it hard to suppress her anger. "Why didn't you save anything back then? You said you thought it was suspicious." David lowered his head. "Thinking something is suspicious and risking your neck are two different things. I chose to keep my job." Claire felt the answer was both cowardly and brutally honest. She, too, had spent years erasing uncomfortable truths to protect her household. Lacking the complete original file, David compared the audio waveforms and save data metadata. The submitted file had been truncated at the front and back, then compressed again, and there was a microscopic jump cut right before the sound of the mug shattering. But technical anomalies alone couldn't prove exactly what had been deleted. Marcus said he would request a formal forensic analysis, but until the results came out, the submitted file would stand as evidence of Claire's instability. Claire listened to her own voice again. That voice, thick with rage and despair, was undeniably hers. The fact that it was edited did not erase the fact that she had shoved objects and screamed that day. For the first time, Claire decided not to hide the parts that made her look bad. She told Marcus exactly what had happened, that she had slammed Richard's laptop shut, knocked over a mug, and screamed that she would destroy the original files. "I lost my temper. I admit that. But my child wasn't in the room, and I wasn't threatening to destroy Leo's things." Marcus nodded. "Trying to paint yourself as a flawless victim will only make your case collapse. We have to separate the facts and present them clearly." Claire burned those words into her mind. Richard used her mistakes as the skeleton for his lies. But just because she admitted to her mistakes didn't mean his fabrications magically became the truth. A few days later, a supervised visitation with Leo was permitted. It took place in a dedicated consultation room at the Child Advocacy Center, with Jessica Ramirez present as an observer. Since the night before, Claire had written down what she wanted to ask, only to erase it all. She decided to only ask about school, his favorite foods, and the books he was reading. However, the moment Leo walked into the room, all her prepared sentences vanished. The boy's shoulders were hunched tighter than before, and the skin around his right fingernails was peeled and red. Claire wanted to run and hug him, but she stayed in her seat and forced a smile. "Leo, thank you for coming." Fiddling with his watch, the boy sat across from her. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation flowed cautiously. Claire asked how the school lunches were, and Leo mentioned that a friend ate 2 bowls of macaroni and cheese the other day. When asked what book he was reading, he explained a story about a robot repairing a spaceship. As his sentences grew a little longer, the knot in Claire's chest slowly began to loosen. Every time the boy smiled, she tried to memorize his expression. For a brief moment, Richard, the court, and the witness statements seemed to cease existing. Jessica took notes from a distance, and Claire didn't push with too many questions. In that moment, it felt as though Leo had returned to being her son. But when Leo lifted a paper cup, his sleeve rode up, revealing a faint bruise on the inside of his wrist. Claire's eyes locked onto it. The bruise looked old, fading into a yellowish hue, and the boy immediately yanked his sleeve back down. Claire knew she should ask casually, but her voice leaped out on its own. "How did you get that?" Startled, Leo covered his wrist. "I just bumped into something." Claire recalled the image of Richard gripping the boy's shoulder in the hallway. "Did Dad grab you?" Jessica looked up, but Claire was already firing her next question. "What did Dad say to you? Did he tell you not to talk about Mom?" The smile from just moments ago vanished from Leo's face. He pulled himself to the edge of his chair, fixing his eyes on the floor. Claire knew she had to stop, but the fear that the boy would retreat back into silence drove her forward. Leo, you can tell Mom. Did Dad get mad? Did he say he wouldn't let you see Mom? The boy's fingers rubbed roughly against the watchband. Jessica quietly called out her name. Miss Davis, please pause your questions for a moment. Only then did Claire realize that she was using the exact same tactic Richard used with his witnesses, predetermining the conclusion and backing the child into a corner. Claire quickly backpedaled. I'm sorry. You don't have to answer. But it was too late. His lips trembling, Leo spoke. Mom, you keep deciding what I have to say. That sentence landed far heavier than a mere childish complaint. Claire sucked in a breath, but her chest wouldn't open. Mom didn't mean it like that. Leo shook his head. Dad said Mom was going to try and make me say weird things. The boy turned his body toward Jessica. I want to go home. Claire reached out her hand, then stopped. The moment she grabbed him, even that gesture could become another source of pressure. Jessica ended the session early. After Leo was moved to a different room, Claire could only stare at the empty chair. She had handed Richard the exact scene he wanted on a silver platter. The neurotic mother who bombarded her child with questions the second she saw him and moved uncomfortably close when he didn't answer. Jessica did not condemn her, but her voice was stern. Asking a child for the facts and giving a child the space to speak their truth are two very different things. Right now, Leo feels that no matter which answer he gives, he loses someone. Claire wanted to bury her face in her hands, but she kept them down. She needed to look at the terror her child felt before she looked at her own shame. I had no intention of turning my child into a witness, Claire said. After a brief silence, Jessica replied. What you intended, and what the child felt, are two different things. Those words cut deeper than Marcus's legal warnings. Claire was furious that Richard forced Leo to memorize sentences. But she had just expected her child to give her the exact answers she wanted. She wanted to believe the difference lay in their intentions. But from the child's perspective, both parents probably looked like people trying to wage war through his mouth. Claire closed her eyes and recalled every question she had just asked. Not a single one had asked how the boy was actually feeling right now. That evening, Richard's legal team argued that based on the visitation logs, Claire was trying to induce specific testimonies from the child. It was the expected reaction, but Claire couldn't protest. When Marcus read the report to her and said, "We will counter the parts they exaggerated," Claire admitted her fault first. I pushed him with my questions. I saw him hiding a bruise, and I panicked. Marcus Sahil, if you admit to this, they will use it against you. Claire nodded. Even so, I can't pretend it didn't happen. If I don't want to become like Richard, I have to leave the facts that make me look bad on the record too. A notice arrived that the next visitation would be postponed indefinitely. Claire sat on her bed, staring for a long time at a photo of Leo's empty room. When she left the house she shared with Richard, she hadn't been able to pack enough of the boy's belongings. The dinosaur pencil holder on the desk, the space map on the wall, the little nightlight she turned on before he slept. They were all left behind in that house. Claire once thought that if she could just get those things back, her life with her son would return to normal. But what was needed now wasn't the physical room, but the absolute certainty that no matter what Leo said, he wouldn't lose her love. And that certainty couldn't be built with a court order. Claire sent an apology text to Jessica. Without making excuses for her behavior, she promised that if given another chance, she would not ask the child any questions. Jessica did not reply immediately. A few hours later, a short message arrived. What the child needs is an adult who doesn't demand the right answer. When the next opportunity comes, show him that promise through your actions. Claire printed that sentence and pinned it next to her timeline on the wall. The wall was covered with evidence proving Richard's fabrications, but that one sentence was the evidence she needed to never forget her own mistake. She now had to document not just the direction of her fight, but the manner in which she fought. Meanwhile, Richard was highly satisfied upon hearing that the visitation had been terminated early. He asked Leo if he had a hard time because his mom asked too many questions. The boy didn't answer, but Richard took the silence as agreement. See? Now you know why Dad told you to be careful. Leo fiddled with his smartwatch and looked down. Stroking his son's hair, Richard told him that during the next psychological evaluation, he had to tell them exactly what his mom had asked him. The boy felt that what his father wanted him to say wasn't drastically different from the questions his mother had fired at him, but he couldn't explain why. The adults all demanded the truth from him, yet neither of them could wait for the truth he was actually terrified to speak. Dr. Jenkins called Richard to warn him that Claire was trying to verify the exact time the medical records were revised. We can no longer explain away the date discrepancy as a simple clerical error. Richard feigned calmness, but his voice dropped. Then just reclassify it as a remote telehealth session. Jenkins sighed. It's even riskier if there are no phone logs. You have to claim that it was a retroactive update based on Guardian reports. Richard stayed silent for a moment before replying. You're the expert. Make it sound convincing. Jenkins's face hardened. At first, she had rationalized supplementing the records by believing Richard's lies, but now he was explicitly ordering her to finalize the forgery. After hanging up, Jenkins opened her medical records database. Next to the heavily revised sentences, her own account name was logged. Some additions were based on text messages Richard had sent, and others utilized exaggerated terminology under the guise of concern for Claire's condition. Every time she typed them, she tried to convince herself it was for the safety of the child. But if she deleted the records now, the digital trace of the deletion would be even more glaring. Jenkins kept her hand resting on the mouse, unable to move. The very documents designed to destroy Claire were now holding her own career hostage. For the first time that day, Jenkins feared the records more than she feared Richard. A few days later, David Clark found the possibility that another copy of the truncated audio file existed. The overhead mic in the conference room didn't just record the official audio, it kept a temporary quality check buffer, and the backup drive prior to the server replacement was stored in an off-site warehouse. However, it was unknown if the hardware still functioned. Marcus emphasized that they shouldn't attempt to retrieve it without a proper legal warrant. Suppressing her impatience, Claire sent a formal preservation request to the broadcasting network. The company initially balked, claiming technical data was irrelevant to a personal dispute, but after confirming the files were scheduled for routine deletion, they agreed to review the preservation request. The race against time had begun, but this time, she wasn't moving alone. Richard's side demanded that the temporary custody arrangement be strictly maintained, weaponizing the truncated audio file. They claimed Claire had threatened to destroy the child's belongings and family photos, and argued she had tried to coach the child during their recent supervised visit. Marcus countered by submitting the Boston broadcast logs, the forensic traces of audio editing, and the revision timestamps from the medical records together. Neither side had landed a definitive blow yet. The court evaluator officially warned both parties not to discuss the case with the child, and to cease all direct questioning or testimony rehearsals. Reading that mandate, Claire felt a wave of relief, knowing Richard had received the same warning, yet there was no way to verify what was actually happening inside his house. Jessica contacted Claire, telling her a brief apology visit could be permitted. The condition was that the conversation could not exceed a few minutes, and she was strictly forbidden from asking any case-related questions. Claire typed out and deleted her prepared words multiple times. She deleted the sentence asking him to trust her, and the sentence telling him he didn't have to say what his dad told him to. Both of them were sentences demanding the child make a choice. Ultimately, she left only 3 things: that she was sorry for asking too many questions, that it was perfectly okay if Leo didn't want to say anything at all, and that no matter what emotions he felt, his mother's love would never change. During the brief meeting, Leo didn't look at his mother from the start. Crouching down to eye level, Claire slowly spoke her prepared words. Mom kept asking questions last time without checking if you were ready to talk. Mom was wrong to do that. Leo's fingers stopped moving. Claire continued. You don't have to take Mom's side, and you don't have to take Dad's side. If you don't want to remember something, you don't have to say it. The boy kept his eyes averted, but his body didn't flinch backward like before. Claire tried hard not to inflate that tiny difference into false hope. Finally, Claire pointed to the smartwatch on his wrist. Do you remember the side button on this watch? Leo cautiously nodded. Claire re-explained the feature she had taught him the day he got lost at the amusement park. Holding the side button for a few seconds activated the SOS function, triggering a short tone and saving his location data. This isn't a toy to send secret messages to Mom. It's to call for help when you get lost or when you're truly, really scared. Jessica verified that the device's settings actually functioned that way. Claire confirmed that the emergency contact she had registered long ago was still active. For the first time, Leo lifted his head and looked at his mother. If I press it, Mom comes? Claire wanted to make a bulletproof promise, but she stopped herself. If Richard was feeding the child absolute lies, laced with certainty, she had to tell the truth, even if it was imperfect. Mom might not be able to get there right away, but someone will know you asked for help, and they will try to make sure you are safe. The boy rubbed the screen of the watch with his thumb. What if Dad says I can't press it? Taking a deep breath, Claire replied. If you are truly scared, you don't need anyone's permission. When Jessica announced their time was up, Claire didn't say another word. Leo stood up from his chair, but paused just before reaching the door. Is Mom mad if I still like Dad? That question shattered Claire's heart. She realized just how deep the guilt Richard had planted in the child truly ran. At the same time, she had to admit that she, too, had acted as if her words would only be true if her child was terrified of his father. Claire didn't force a smile. I'm not mad. Your feelings of liking Dad belong to you. If you have feelings of being scared, those belong to you too. Leo gave a very tiny nod. Just before stepping out the door, the child asked one last question. His voice was so small that Jessica had to lean in to hear it. If I press the button, and Dad says I'm lying, will Mom believe me? Claire didn't answer immediately. Just saying, I believe you shouldn't mean validating every memory as absolute fact, nor should it give the impression of doubt. She spoke slowly. Mom will believe the feeling that you were scared. And as for what actually happened, we will figure it out step by step with safe adults. Only then did Leo pull the watch out from under his sleeve. After the door closed, Claire couldn't move for a long time. During the last visit, she had desperately wanted to hear Richard's sins come out of the child's mouth. This time, she resolved to wait so that whatever Leo said, the words would truly belong to him. Closing her notebook, Jessica spoke. Today, you left him with a promise instead of a question. You must continue to keep that promise. Claire nodded. To win in court, she needed evidence files, dates, and edit logs. But to win back her relationship with her child, she needed time that forced absolutely nothing upon him. The two battles looked similar, but they required completely different methods to fight. Stepping outside, Leo walked toward Richard, who was waiting at the end of the hallway. Seeing the watch exposed outside the boy's sleeve, Richard furrowed his brow. Did your mom talk about the watch? Leo hesitated briefly before nodding. Laughing, Richard grabbed the boy's wrist. You shouldn't press that button for no reason. Your mom might get the wrong idea again. Leo's shoulders stiffened, but this time, he didn't hide the watch. Watching them from afar, Claire didn't run over. Instead, she memorized the exact time and location where Richard's hand touched her child's wrist. And she etched the final question the boy had asked her into her heart. That night, beneath the list of evidence pinned to the wall, Claire wrote a new sentence. The goal is not to make Leo tell the truth. The goal is to build an environment where he isn't thrown away, even if he voices his fear. She taped that sentence right next to the truncated audio file and the forged medical record. Richard had weaponized her anger to brand her an unstable mother, and Dr. Jenkins had erased the context to create records that looked like diagnoses. If Claire used the same tactics cutting off her child's words to craft the evidence she needed, then even if she won, she would be no different from Richard. For the first time, she firmly established the moral line she would not cross, above her legal strategy. Right before she fell asleep, a device management alert popped up on Claire's phone. It was an automated message stating that the emergency contact settings on Leo's smartwatch had been checked. An actual SOS had not been triggered. It was possible someone had opened and closed the menu, or that the child was simply checking the feature. Claire gripped her phone, but did not contact Richard. If she interrogated Leo immediately, the boy would have to explain himself again, and Richard might simply turn the feature off entirely. She took a screenshot of the alert and, keeping her promise, sent it only to Marcus and Jessica. And in the darkness, she made a quiet vow. Next time, she would wait until the child spoke first. The next morning, a short update came from Jessica. She said that after the visit, Leo had been anxious, but he repeatedly verified the fact that his mother had told him he didn't have to pick a side. Reading that sentence, Claire closed her eyes. The relationship hadn't been fully repaired, and the child wasn't entirely safe yet. Richard was still in the same house with Leo, and Jenkins's records were still legally binding. But for the first time, a small exit had appeared in the child's heart. To widen that exit, Claire decided not to push anything. In that moment, she learned that the hardest counterattack is sometimes simply waiting. Staring down at the traffic through the network building's window, Richard flipped through a new program pitch deck. The working title was The Voice of the Family, and the cover page featured a photo of a father walking with his child. The production team was heavily leaning into his image as a responsible anchor protecting his son through a difficult domestic situation. Richard tweaked one specific phrase. Instead of a father protecting a wounded home, he changed it to a voice holding together a shaken family. He truly believed his life wasn't collapsing, but simply moving onto a bigger stage. After the pitch meeting ended, Richard suggested to the executive producer that Leo could make a brief voice cameo. Just a few seconds in a segment where the child says thank you to his dad would be perfect, he claimed. The executive producer expressed concern over exposing a minor, but Richard persuaded him, emphasizing parental consent and anonymity. He also subtly slipped in that the court's temporary rulings were heavily leaning in his favor. No one bothered to ask what the child actually wanted. Richard smiled as if he already knew Leo's answer. To him, consent was a word he was entitled to decide before the child even spoke. Returning home, Richard sat Leo on the living room sofa and turned on the voice recorder app on his phone. Dad has always stayed by my side. He read the sentence slowly and told the boy to repeat it. Leo stuttered over the first two words and stopped. Maintaining his smile, Richard started over. Don't be nervous. Just say exactly what you feel. Yet, the piece of paper explicitly listed the emotions the child was supposed to feel. Gratitude, relief, trust. Looking down at those words, Leo fiddled with his watch band. On the third attempt, Leo messed up the sentence. After saying dad is always, he accidentally said his mom's name. Richard's expression instantly hardened. Why is your mother coming up here? Leo clamped his mouth shut. Stopping the recording, Richard leaned in close to the boy. This isn't about saying bad things about your mom. It's about telling people that dad is taking good care of you. When the boy didn't answer, Richard dropped his voice. You need to cooperate so your mom can quietly get her treatment. Leo didn't fully comprehend the exact meaning of those words, but he clearly understood the implication that if he messed up, something terrible would happen to his mother. He read the sentence again. His voice was tiny, and the gaps between the words were unnaturally long. Richard recorded it a few more times, then cropped the file to save only the part that sounded the most natural. The sections where the child gasped for air or hesitated were deleted. What remained was a short, crisp sentence of a son thanking his father. Richard listened to the playback with satisfaction, but to Leo, his own voice sounded completely foreign. At the same hour, Claire received official notice from the National Broadcasting Network that her return-to-work review had been concluded. The company explained it would be difficult to assign her to primary production duties until her dispute was resolved. That single sentence created a limbo. She wasn't fired, but she wasn't reinstated either. Hanging up the phone, Claire stared at her bank book and her unpaid utility bills on the desk. The money she borrowed from her friend was dwindling, and the lease on her temporary apartment ended in 2 months. While she was battling the fictional narrative Richard had spun, her actual, physical reality was shrinking by the day. Marcus told her they could formally protest the network's decision, but forcing an immediate reinstatement would be difficult. For the first time, Claire raised her voice. That man stole the program I created, and the company pushes me out because of rumors that I'm dangerous. And you're telling me to just keep waiting? Marcus didn't try to block her anger. Waiting is not the same as not preparing. He pointed to the preserved audio files and the medical revision logs. If we release this now, it becomes a mudslinging match. If we finish the forensic verification, the foundational credibility of their evidence completely collapses. Claire opened her laptop and began drafting a new post. She laid out the timeline chronologically, how Richard had hijacked her pitch and how he had weaponized her mental health records to silence her. This time, she didn't use Leo's name. Yet, the more she read the sentences, the more she realized the child's existence was buried between every line. To explain how Richard was exploiting his father image, she would inevitably have to expose how the child was being used. Claire saved the file, but did not hit send. She feared seeing Leo trapped in clickbait headlines more than she feared losing her chance at a comeback. Dr. Jenkins showed up at Richard's house that evening. Seeing Jenkins arrive unannounced, Richard did not hide his displeasure. "You could have just called." Checking to make sure Leo was in the living room, Jenkins closed the study door. "A formal request for the original medical records has been filed. They can view the entire revision history." Leaning back in his chair, Richard spoke nonchalantly. "You said the entry dates got mixed up. Just stick to that story and end it." Jenkins pulled a printout from her bag and spread it on the desk. The margins were densely covered in red marks, highlighting the revised dates. Jenkins explained that the discrepancies weren't just found on the day of the live broadcast, but on several other dates as well. Some entries claimed direct observation occurred while Claire was away on overseas business trips, and several Guardian reports were added to the logs weeks after they supposedly occurred. "If we submit this as is, it won't look like a simple error. It will look like intentional tampering." Richard skimmed the document and scoffed. "Then align the dates. Just classify it as a Guardian report instead of a consultation and be done with it." Hearing that, Jenkins's face turned to stone. "If we alter an already submitted record again, it's even more dangerous." Richard couldn't hide his irritation. "If you had done it right the first time, we wouldn't be dealing with this." At those words, Jenkins lost her ability to speak for a moment. The person who had originally suggested supplementing the records was Richard. He had convinced her that if Claire returned to her show, her treatment might stop, and that the danger needed to be documented unequivocally. At the time, Jenkins had tried to believe she was protecting a patient. But now, Richard was shifting the entire blame onto her, as if it were just her clerical mistake. Outside the study, a small sound echoed. Leo had come out to get a glass of water and bumped into a decorative vase near the door. Richard yanked the door open instantly. The startled child almost dropped his cup. "What were you doing out here?" Richard demanded. Leo shrank his neck into his shoulders. "Getting water." After scanning the hallway, Richard grabbed the boy's wrist and dragged him into the study. Leo's toes caught on the doorframe, but Richard didn't slow down. Jenkins stood up with an uncomfortable expression. "Stop it," in front of the child. But Richard slammed the door shut again. Standing Leo in front of the desk, Richard demanded, "What exactly did you just hear?" The boy shook his head. "Nothing." Without letting go of his wrist, Richard pressed again. "Did you hear us talking about dates? Did you hear us talking about records?" Leo did not answer. The child's breathing grew shallow, and his fingertips stiffened inside his sleeves. Jenkins quietly tried to pry Richard's hand away. He was just walking by coincidence. Richard didn't shove her away, but his eyes turned icy. "Are you saying it's fine if this kid runs to his mother and says whatever he wants?" Leo recalled the room where he had last seen his mom. Mom had told him that if he was truly scared, he didn't need anyone's permission to press the watch button. But right now, Dad was standing right in front of him, and Dr. Jenkins was there too. The two adults were angry at each other, yet neither of them asked him why he was scared. Inside his sleeve, the boy moved his fingers. The location of the side button was familiar. It was the exact spot his mom had made him practice pressing multiple times at the amusement park. That memory felt like the only choice permitted to him in this room. As Leo remained silent, Richard dropped his voice even lower. "Leo, think carefully. If you say weird things, your mom will look like an even sicker person. Then we might have to put your mom in a hospital for a very long time." All the color drained from Leo's face. The boy imagined his mother locked alone in a dark room. Jenkins immediately interjected. Do not speak to him like that. You are terrifying the child. Richard glared at her. Then you explain it to him. Make him understand why we have to align the dates. Jenkins clamped her mouth shut. She realized Richard had just openly admitted to their conspiracy out loud. Looking at Leo, she spoke softly. You don't have to say anything. Go back to your room. As the boy tried to move, Richard blocked him again. Promise me first. What you heard today does not leave this family. Leo began pressing the button on his watch. His fingers trembled, but he pinned his arm to his side, so his sleeve wouldn't shift. A tiny vibration traveled up his wrist bone. The child took that vibration as a sign that someone was finally holding his hand. After he held the button down for a few seconds, a minuscule indicator light clicked on in the corner of the screen. Hidden under the sleeve, Richard couldn't see it. Leo didn't know if his mom would get the alert, or if someone would come right away. But just the possibility that he wouldn't have to explain his terror using only his own words allowed him to breathe a little easier. The device was set to silent vibration mode rather than an audible alarm, and it began recording the ambient audio in the room. Unable to let go of the button, the child waited for Richard's next words. Richard took Leo's silence as rebellion. What did your mom tell you to do? Did she tell you to contact her with that watch? Leo shook his head. Richard tried to pull the boy's sleeve up, but Jenkins grabbed his arm to stop him. Stop it. Everything you're saying right now could become a major issue. Richard sneered. What issue? Is there a wiretap in here? At those words, Jenkins's face hardened. Instinctively, Leo hid his wrist behind his back. The tiny recording light remained on. Every voice in the room was quietly piling up inside that light. Lowering her voice, Jenkins spoke. The dates on the records already don't match, and the witnesses' statements are under review. If it comes out that you pressured the child in here, everything we've built could come crashing down. Richard heard the word built in her sentence, but he didn't correct it. You helped build it too. Don't think you can wriggle out of this alone now. Jenkins sucked in a breath. It started as just organizing Guardian reports. You were the one who kept demanding I write the risk factors more explicitly. Both of them seemed to have forgotten that Leo was listening. Leo didn't understand what aligning dates or Guardian reports meant, but he could understand that the two of them had created documents about his mother together. He recalled the broadcast script he had just been forced to memorize. Dad has always stayed by my side. That sentence now felt like a lie, but the moment he thought of his dad as a liar, his heart ached. The child loved his father, and simultaneously, he was terrified of the father standing before him right now. For the first time, he understood his mother's words that both emotions could exist at the same time. Richard squatted down in front of the boy again. His voice suddenly turned sweet. Leo, Dad is just trying to protect you. Right now, Mom believes her own delusions are real, and she could make things very hard for you. The boy didn't lift his eyes. Richard continued. If anyone asks later, just say you didn't hear anything today. And you can tell them you were scared because Mom kept asking you about Dad. Leo's shoulders trembled. Jenkins said, You are feeding him testimony, but her voice lacked any force. Looking back at Jenkins, Richard said, Your fabricated records are crumbling. So now you're going to make me out to be the only bad guy? Jenkins didn't argue back anymore. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Before leaving, she looked at Leo. But she neither apologized to the child nor offered to help him. Grabbing her arm, Richard whispered low, Align the dates before the submission deadline. If our stories don't match, we're both finished. Jenkins shook off his hand and walked out. After the front door closed, only Richard and Leo remained in the house. Before sending the boy back to his room, Richard said one last thing. If you tell Mom what happened today, you might never see her again. That's not what Dad wants. It's what happens when you break a promise. Fighting back tears, Leo nodded. Only after he went into his room and closed the door did he check the watch screen. The tiny indicator was still on. The child didn't know how to turn it off, nor did he want to. He was terrified that if someone heard this, his dad would disappear. But if no one heard it, his mom would disappear. At that exact same time, a A short device management alert arrived on Claire's phone. It was a notification stating that the SOS feature on the protected device had been activated, but due to an unstable connection, only partial location data had been transmitted. Claire shot up from her chair. The map displayed the area around Richard's house. She almost dialed Richard's number, but stopped her hand. If Richard found out, he could rip the watch off or delete the recording. Keeping her promise, Claire only sent the screenshot to Marcus and Jessica. Her hands were shaking, but this time, she didn't act alone. The few seconds of waiting felt longer than any live broadcast disaster she had ever faced. Jessica verified the registered Guardian device info and settings at the school. The feature was designed to save location data and ambient audio if the button was pressed for a certain duration, but it was not structured to instantly transmit the full audio file to the Guardian. The recording was highly likely still stored locally on the device itself. Marcus told Claire absolutely not to go to Richard's house. If you storm in there now, they will claim it was a malfunction and destroy the device. Unless immediate physical danger to the child is confirmed, we must verify his safety through official channels. The advice felt cruel, but Claire complied. An inquiry regarding Leo's safety was dispatched to Richard through the school counselor and relevant authorities. Richard responded that Leo had simply pressed the button by mistake, and that absolutely nothing was wrong in the house. He put the boy on the phone and made him say he was fine. Over the line, Leo's voice was microscopic. Claire couldn't speak to him directly, but she confirmed through Jessica that the child wasn't physically harmed. After the call ended, Richard tried to take the watch off. However, Leo hid his wrist behind his back, claiming he needed it for school. Richard glared at him for a moment, then told him to leave it on, only until the next psychological evaluation was over. The next morning, Leo arrived at school earlier than usual. He didn't go into his classroom, but stood outside Jessica's counseling office. When Jessica opened the door, the boy held out his wrist without a word. A low battery warning was flashing on the screen, as it hadn't been charged all night. "Is it broken?" Jessica asked. Leo shook his head. "There's a sound inside." The child didn't explain what the sound was. Jessica didn't play it right away, either. Instead, she asked if it was okay to hold on to the watch, and if it was okay not to give it back to Mom or Dad immediately. Leo couldn't answer for a long time. If he handed over the watch, his dad would think he broke his promise. If he didn't hand it over, the threat that his mom might disappear kept echoing in his head. Jessica waited. "You're not giving this to me to punish anyone. We can hold on to it just to make sure you were safe." Only then did Leo unclasp the band. A deep indentation was left on his wrist, where it had pressed into his skin. The boy cupped the watch in both hands for a moment, before slowly placing it into Jessica's palm. "Please don't let Mom hear it right away." Without asking for a reason, Jessica promised. That same day, Richard sent the audio file of Leo to the production team. He explained that the child had actively wanted to record it. However, the executive producer placed the broadcast on hold, citing the ongoing custody dispute involving a minor. Richard pretended to be understanding, but threw his pen across the desk the moment he hung up the phone. The flawless father image he was trying to solidify through the program was beginning to crack. He ordered his agent to find out if Claire's side was pressuring the network. He was more enraged by the possibility that someone was doubting him than by the fact that he had coached his own child. Dr. Jenkins spent all night staring at her medical records, but ultimately couldn't bring herself to revise a single thing. No matter which sentence she changed, it clashed with previous entries, and deleting anything would leave a forensic trace. She reread the text message Richard had sent her. "Align the dates. If our stories don't match, we're both finished." That wasn't teamwork, it was blackmail. For the first time, Jenkins considered contacting Claire to tell her at least part of the truth. But if she made that call, her entire career and network of relationships would instantly collapse. She typed in the number, then deleted it. Silence was still the easiest option. That evening, Claire received a call from Jessica saying Leo had entrusted the watch to her. She also heard that they hadn't opened the file yet, and that the device was powered down and secured in evidence storage to preserve its state. Claire did not demand to hear it. The question, "What did Leo say?" rose to her lips, but she swallowed it. Jessica explained that the child had merely expressed a desire for them to verify his safety. Claire closed her eyes. Her child had ultimately asked for help all by himself. It wasn't happy news. It was proof of just how terrified a 7-year-old boy had been. Marcus told her they needed to inspect the device through a formal legal process. If there is a file, we must preserve its raw state and creation metadata first. If you listen to it beforehand, the opposing side will absolutely claim tampering. Claire nodded. She knew that protecting her child's words so that no one could doubt them was far more important than her own desperate desire to hear his voice. Yet, as the night deepened, her imagination turned brutal. Exactly what had Richard said? Did the child cry? Why did he ask not to let his mom hear it right away? The questions surfaced endlessly. On the day of the next evaluation, Leo didn't sit next to Richard as he usually did. He waited in a separate waiting area with Jessica. Richard demanded to know why the boy wasn't wearing his watch, but Jessica simply replied that it was undergoing standard, safeguarding procedures. Claire saw Leo from the opposite end of the hallway, but she didn't approach him. She intended to keep her promise to wait until the child made the choice first. Leo glanced at his mother briefly before lowering his gaze. His small hands were empty, but the indentation from the watchband was still visible on his wrist. When the evaluator asked Leo if he was ready to speak alone, the boy grabbed Jessica's hand instead of answering. A moment later, he spoke very softly. "I want to talk somewhere without mom or dad around." Richard immediately tried to object, but Marcus and the evaluator intervened. Leo paused in front of the door and looked back at Claire. Claire just nodded, demanding absolutely no specific expression from him. After stepping into the consultation room, the boy asked Jessica to bring the secured watch. He took it with both hands and carefully placed it onto the palm of the evaluator. "The scary sound I heard is inside here." After finishing that single sentence, Leo bit his lip. The evaluator didn't play it right away. She explained to the child that they needed to verify the data and who would hear it first. Leo didn't understand everything, but he made one thing absolutely clear. "I don't want to make mom hate dad because of me. But I don't want mom to disappear either." Unable to hear those words directly from outside the door, Claire waited in complete ignorance. However, just before the consultation room door closed, she saw the tiny, unextinguished recording indicator light flash briefly on the corner of the watch screen. After Leo stepped inside, the door clicked shut. Claire sat on the hallway bench, her hands clasped tightly together. Across from her, Richard bounced his leg relentlessly, and Dr. Jenkins bit her lip next to her legal counsel. No one knew exactly what was inside that watch. The evaluator explained that she would listen to the child's story in the manner he preferred, secure the device separately, and then verify its raw state. Claire nodded at those words, but her fingertips were ice cold. The mere fact that Leo had been terrified enough to hit the SOS button squeezed the breath out of her. Inside the room, Jessica Ramirez didn't demand that Leo recount the events in chronological order. Instead, she set the watch aside and asked him what worried him the most right now. Staring at the floor for a long time, Leo finally spoke. "I'm scared mom is going to disappear." Jessica didn't ask why he thought that. Instead, she asked how his body felt when he heard those words. The boy replied that his wrist hurt and he couldn't breathe well. He added multiple times that he didn't hate his dad. It was as if he believed no other story would be permitted unless he stated that first. The evaluator explained to Leo that they needed to check the audio inside the watch. She clarified that it wouldn't be played immediately for his mom or dad. They first had to confirm exactly when the original file was made and whether anything had been altered. Leo didn't grasp every word, but he confirmed one thing. "Please tell them I didn't do it to punish dad." The evaluator nodded. "We are just going to confirm that you asked for help during a moment when you were terrified." Only then did Leo leave the watch on the desk and hide his hands under his knees. Waiting outside, Claire didn't immediately jump up when the door opened. Jessica came out first, explaining that while the child wasn't in immediate physical danger, he was able to speak much more stably in a space separated from both guardians. Claire desperately wanted to ask, "What did he say?" But she held it in. Instead, she asked if Leo wanted to see her right now. Jessica relayed that the boy felt it would be better not to see her immediately today. Claire's heart sank, but she nodded. She had to protect the child's right to choose his distance. That was the promise she had made. The watch was immediately placed in an evidence bag and secured. Without turning the power back on or playing the file, they photographed the device's condition and exterior, and documented the chain of custody. Marcus Thorne strongly advised Claire never to personally request the device or attempt to copy the files under any circumstances. The other side is already preparing to claim fabrication. If the chain of custody breaks, it won't matter how important the content is. It will drag out into an endless legal mudfight. Claire tried her best not to look at the watch. The thought that her child's lonely, terrifying night was trapped inside a device no bigger than her palm felt unbearably heavy. Richard immediately filed an objection. He claimed that the child might not have fully understood the device's functions and could have recorded accidentally, and argued that since Claire had taught him how to use the button during a previous visit, she had essentially instructed him to record, which was tantamount to manipulation. Claire shot up from her seat to protest, but Marcus blocked her with his hand. Seeing that movement, Richard sneered. "See that? She can never control her emotions like that." Claire sat back down. What Richard wanted wasn't the truth, he wanted a reaction. Swallowing her rage, she recorded just one sentence in her mind. "He is trying to twist a button pressed out of fear by a child into a command given by a mother." For several days, the watch underwent verification through a formal forensic process. Claire wasn't even given a preliminary update. To survive that wait, she reorganized all the evidence on her wall. The 12 witness statements, the Boston Live broadcast logs, Jenkins's revision history, the truncated audio file, and the dates Richard's authority had expanded were separated into distinct columns. Even without the watch, there was more than enough evidence to raise serious doubts. Claire repeatedly told herself, Leo's voice must not become the miracle that magically solves this case from start to finish. Her child had absolutely nothing to prove. He merely held the adults accountable for verifying what they had already missed. On the day the verification results came out, Marcus closed his office door and explained everything slowly to Claire. Inside the watch, there was a single, continuous audio file that began the moment the SOS feature was activated. The creation metadata matched the exact time the alert was sent to your phone, and there are absolutely no traces of deletion or splicing. The file was never transmitted to your phone, nor is there any record of you ever accessing it directly. Marcus emphasized this fact above the actual content. At the very least, their claim that you edited this or orchestrated the file for the child has been entirely neutralized. Claire could not feel relieved. Now, she had to hear exactly what was inside it. The first thing she heard was Leo's short, ragged breathing and the rustle of his clothing. Then, Richard's voice rang out. "If anyone asks later, just say you didn't hear anything today." Claire's fingers went rigid. Richard continued, coaching the boy to say, "You can tell them you were scared because Mom kept asking you about Dad." Dr. Jenkins's voice followed. "You are feeding him testimony." A moment later, the conversation shifted to the dates not matching, and their mutual panic that if their stories misaligned, everything they had built would crumble. Claire didn't ask Marcus to stop the audio. The recording did not contain a perfect, movie-like confession. There was no sentence where Jenkins explicitly admitted to forging the medical records, nor a scene where Richard stated he bribed all the witnesses, but combined with the evidence they already had, the context shifted entirely. Richard had coached his child to give specific answers. Jenkins knew the dates and records didn't match, and both of them worried that if this discrepancy was exposed, their entire fabricated narrative would collapse. Above all, Richard had threatened Leo, telling him that if he told the truth, he might never see his mother again. The child's silence was not a choice. It was manufactured through sheer terror. As the audio reached its end, Claire lowered her head. Richard was recorded saying, "If you tell Mom what happened today, you might never see her again." Following that, in the long stretch of silence, Leo's hitched breathing, struggling to hold back tears, could be heard. Claire clamped a hand over her mouth. She wanted to run to her child right that second and tell him how sorry she was. If she had caught on earlier, if she had left the house sooner, if she had fought back against Richard from the very beginning, Leo would never have had to press a button like this. Recognizing the guilt washing over her face, Marcus spoke. What matters right now is not who figured it out first. It's making sure that from this day forward, your child never has to secretly manufacture his own evidence again. The file from the watch acted as a catalyst, forcing a re-examination of every other piece of evidence. A supplementary investigation into the drafting process of the 12 witness statements began, revealing that Richard's agent had sent an identical questionnaire to multiple witnesses. While the document files were saved under different names, their original author metadata and sentence structures were identical. Some witnesses admitted they hadn't used their own words, but had merely read and signed pre-drafted documents. Not everyone had lied. Some had genuinely seen Claire cry or raise her voice. The problem was that the context before and after those moments was entirely scrubbed, and all the statements were edited to point to the exact same conclusion. Mrs. Miller, the housekeeper, ultimately retracted portions of her statement. She confessed that Richard's agent had asked her to verify some family situations while processing the remainder of her severance package, and she had received a finalized document after answering a few questions. She also newly disclosed that on the day Claire cried in front of the child, Richard had confiscated Claire's phone first, preventing her from contacting her parents. Mrs. Miller didn't try to justify her silence. I was terrified I wouldn't get the money I was owed. Claire didn't tell her she forgave her. She simply asked Mrs. Miller to submit a formal record explaining why she was finally setting the facts straight. Responsibility and fear could exist at the same time. Dr. Jenkins's medical records were also cross-referenced with the clinic's master server. Several entries had been added weeks after the initial creation date, and the revision timestamps perfectly coincided with the period Richard had usurped Claire's production duties. There were clear digital footprints showing that what started as a Guardian report magically morphed into direct observation later on. Initially, Jenkins claimed it was just routine record cleanup. However, once her voice was confirmed on the Smartwatch recording, her excuses became untenable. She admitted she had copy-pasted Richard's text messages verbatim and had used exaggerated terminology to heighten the perception of danger, even on days she hadn't physically seen Claire. Yet, she maintained until the bitter end that it was all clinical judgment aimed at protecting the child. The results of the independent psychological evaluation were also submitted. It noted that while Claire had experienced difficulties due to severe stress, sleep deprivation, and prolonged isolation, there was no clinical basis to conclude she lacked the capacity to care for her child. The evaluator made it explicitly clear that it was impossible to retroactively determine if her past symptoms were driven by medication, overwork, or relational abuse. However, there was a massive chasm between the claim in Jenkins's records that Claire suffered from persistent loss of reality testing and her actual, current psychological baseline. Claire didn't take this result as a victory lap. Proving she was fine wasn't as important as proving that being labeled a sick person shouldn't automatically strip someone of their right to a voice. Data was also recovered from the off-site backup drive David Clark had requested to preserve. It wasn't a pristine, complete file, but it contained far more of the audio leading up to the incident than the clip Richard had submitted. In that recovered audio, Richard repeatedly attacked Claire's competence and her fitness as a mother, denying her any chance to speak. Claire had ultimately screamed and shoved a mug. That action didn't disappear. However, the version Richard had submitted deliberately edited out his own calculated provocation, leaving only Claire's explosive reaction. Forensic analysis confirmed that Richard's submitted file was a resaved, truncated slice of the raw audio. Marcus told Claire that while they had amassed enough favorable evidence, her past behavior would still be heavily scrutinized. Claire didn't hide. During the next evaluation hearing, she openly admitted that she had lost her temper, knocked objects over, and cornered Leo with rapid-fire questions during their visit. At the time, I believed that if my child just spoke the truth, everything would be solved. So I asked what I needed to know, rather than asking if he was ready. Richard's lawyer immediately seized on this, arguing she had manipulated the child. Claire didn't make excuses. That is why I apologized. And after that, I never demanded any choice from my child again. I believe that not hiding my own mistakes is the starting point of true protection. Richard believed Claire's admissions played right into his hands. He stood up and heavily emphasized the possibility that Leo, influenced by his mother, had pressed the watch button out of confusion. A 7-year-old child cannot accurately assess a situation. Claire repeatedly badgered him about whether he was scared of me, and as a result, the child misinterpreted a normal conversation as a threat. When the evaluator asked Richard why he had rehearsed a specific testimony with the child, he claimed it was just prep work for a television appearance. Regarding his threat that Leo might never see his mom again, he brushed it off, saying he was merely warning the boy that lying could complicate the legal proceedings. But the more Richard tried to clean up his mess, the deeper he sank. He went as far as claiming that Leo was naturally an anxious child who easily absorbed other people's emotions. He wasn't saying the recording in the watch was fake. He was saying the child's interpretation of the event couldn't be trusted. In that exact moment, Claire realized that not once had Richard ever asked Leo why times he was scared. He blamed the marks on the boy's wrist, his shortened breath, and the fight at school entirely on Claire's influence. The moment his son said something disadvantageous to him, Leo stopped being a child needing protection and became an unreliable witness. The evaluator asked Richard directly. After hearing the recording, what were your thoughts regarding the fact that your child felt genuine terror? Richard paused for a long time. Claire waited for him to say he was sorry to Leo, or to at least admit he had no intention of scaring him. But Richard's first response was different. We must first determine if the child's emotions were exaggerated. The air in the room shifted. That single sentence revealed far more than any legal defense could. To Richard, what mattered wasn't whether his child was actually terrified, but how that terror would impact his own public image. Sitting in the same room, Dr. Jenkins began distancing herself from Richard. She highlighted the fact that she had repeatedly told him not to pressure the child in the recording. Richard instantly fired back that Jenkins was equally complicit in drafting the records. The two of them began shifting the blame, tearing down the very narrative they had built together. Jenkins stated that Richard had demanded she document the risks more aggressively, while Richard countered that he had merely trusted a medical professional's clinical judgment. The fabricated story that had bound them together could no longer protect either of them. Watching them, Claire felt a hollow emptiness rather than vindictive triumph. The adults who had terrified Leo were still prioritizing their own careers over the child until the bitter end. While the supplemental evaluations were ongoing, the temporary custody arrangement was modified. Leo was placed with Claire in a stable environment for the time being, and visitations with Richard were adjusted to occur under supervised conditions to monitor the child's well-being. It wasn't the final verdict, and Richard's parental rights weren't entirely stripped away. Marcus warned Claire absolutely not to act as if she had won. Leo hasn't just lost his father. His relationship with his father has abruptly shifted. He can feel relieved and deeply saddened at the same time. Claire understood those words perfectly. A child's safety and a child's love were not mutually exclusive emotions. On the first day Leo arrived at Claire's temporary apartment, the boy couldn't take off his shoes in the entryway. He stood there holding a small backpack, a book about space robots, and the powered-down smartwatch. Claire didn't ask if she could hug him. Instead, she placed a pair of slippers near him and showed him his room. Looking around the small room that held barely any of his own belongings, Leo spoke. "If I sleep here, Dad gets mad." Claire's heart ached, but she answered calmly. "Dad's emotions are for the adults to handle. It is not your job to handle them." The child stood there for a long time, as if unable to believe those words. When night fell, Leo couldn't sleep alone. Claire laid out a blanket on the floor next to his bed and lay down. The boy kept his back turned, clutching the smartwatch tightly to his chest. After a long while, he asked, "Mom, did you hear all the sounds inside?" Claire didn't lie. "I listened to the parts we needed to hear with the other adults." Leo's shoulders tensed. "Do you think Dad is a bad person?" Claire didn't answer right away. "Some of the things Dad did were very wrong, but that doesn't mean your feelings of liking Dad are wrong too." The boy's breathing grew just a little bit longer. The next day, a reporter contacted Claire. Mentioning rumors that Richard's new show might be axed by the network, the reporter offered an exclusive interview to highlight her production career alongside the abuse she suffered. The reporter insisted that playing even a fraction of the watch recording would completely flip public opinion. Claire wavered for a moment. It was a chance to undo everything in front of the colleagues and the company that had doubted her. Richard's manufactured image would instantly crumble, and her name could be reinstated on her original pitches. But the price for that was broadcasting Leo's trembling breath and sheer terror to millions of people. Claire declined the offer. "I will not provide my child's voice. And I will not discuss the specific details of the case at this time." The reporter tried to persuade her, offering to alter names and distort the audio. Claire shook her head. "Even if you alter the voice, the terror from that day belongs to my child. I will not use it to reclaim my own career." Hanging up the phone, she stared out the window for a long time. Silence could mean taking a loss again, but this time, her silence wasn't meant to protect Richard. It was a choice to shield her child's most vulnerable moment from the world. The National Broadcasting Network officially suspended production on Richard's new program and launched an internal review. The forensic timeline of the audio files he submitted, and the coercive process of collecting witness statements from junior staff, became the targets of their probe. Richard raged that the company was abandoning him, but publicly, he released a statement claiming he would fully cooperate with all procedures. Dr. Jenkins's clinic also fell under a professional ethics review regarding record management and diagnostic processes. Hearing this news, Claire did not celebrate. The institutional consequences had begun, but Leo's habit of flinching at the sound of a door closing at night remained exactly the same. The speed at which the truth came to light was not the same speed at which a child healed. A few days later, Richard sent a short, court-approved message to Leo. He wrote that Dad loved him, and that once the adults cleared up their misunderstandings, they could go back to the way things were. Claire didn't hide the message. She asked Leo first if he wanted to hear it. After listening to it once, the boy didn't say a word. Claire didn't curse Richard, nor did she point out the manipulative flaws in his message. Fiddling with his watch, Leo asked, "If things go back to the way they were, does Mom disappear again?" Claire shook her head. "We are never going back to the way things were without the safety rules the adults agreed on." Leo still seemed to regret handing over the watch. He asked if it was his fault his dad couldn't go to work on TV anymore, and if Dr. Jenkins was in trouble because of him. Every time, Claire answered the exact same way. "It is the result of the choices the adults made. Asking for help was never your fault." But a child couldn't believe it after just one explanation. Richard had spent a long time teaching the boy that his mother's health, the trial, and the family's future all hinged on his words. To lift that crushing responsibility off his shoulders, Claire had to repeat the same truth dozens of times. She resolved never to grow tired of repeating it. One evening, while organizing his colored pencils at the dining table, Leo suddenly asked, "Mom, if I had told you earlier, would you not have hurt so much?" Claire put down the plate she was holding. That question held the heaviest guilt the child had been carrying all this time. She sat in the chair across from him and met his eyes levelly. "No. Not being able to tell me wasn't your fault either. When you are terrified, sometimes your voice just doesn't come out." Leo bit his lip. "But Mom got mad because I didn't say anything." Claire recalled the look on her own face during that disastrous supervised visit. She made no excuses. "Mom was so upset and scared that I acted wrongly. I kept badgering you when you weren't ready. That was Mom's fault." The boy looked at her for a long time. Claire continued, "But I wasn't mad at you because you told me late. It just broke my heart thinking about how scared you must have been, all by yourself while you couldn't speak." Tears welled up in Leo's eyes. "Then, can I tell you now?" Claire didn't reach out. She waited. "You can tell me now, you can tell me later, or you don't have to tell me at all. You being safe comes first." After a long pause, Leo slid off his chair and stood in front of Claire. He didn't ask if it was okay to hug her, but slowly rested his forehead against her shoulder. Claire wrapped her arms around him, but only as much as he leaned into her. In a tiny voice, Leo asked, "Mom, are you mad that I kept Dad's voice in here?" Claire didn't stroke his back, she just held him steady. "I'm not mad. I'm just so sorry that you were that terrified, and nobody noticed it right away." The tension slowly drained from Leo's body. Claire spoke one last time. "There is no set time limit for speaking about your fear. Whenever you are able to say it, Mom will listen right then. Months later, on the day the final ruling was issued, Claire didn't hide from the reporters outside the courthouse. Nor did she stop for them. Marcus had advised her not to answer any questions, and Claire agreed. No matter what the result was, the moment Leo's name hit the headlines again, the fragile daily life the boy had barely reclaimed would be shaken. Pulling her black cap down low, she quietly walked inside. At the end of the hallway, Richard stood with his lawyers, but the two did not look at each other. In the past, she would have tried to read his expression to predict his next move, but now, Claire no longer held the responsibility of managing Richard's emotions. The final ruling did not wrap everything up in one neat sentence. The judge comprehensively factored in Leo's living stability, the behavior of both guardians, the independent evaluations, the doctored medical records, the truncated audio files, and the psychological pressure inflicted upon the child. Leo was to reside primarily with Claire in a stable environment, maintaining his current school and counseling setup. Visitations with Richard were to be phased in gradually, under strict conditions that prioritized monitoring the child's psychological state. It wasn't a ruling that erased the father forever, nor was it a declaration that Claire was a flawless parent. However, it drew a definitive line. The child's fear would no longer be dismissed as exaggeration or misunderstanding. Claire didn't burst into tears upon hearing the result. Watching Marcus pack up his legal pads, she recalled the day Leo had first come to her apartment, unable to take off his shoes in the entryway. The boy still flinched when doors slammed shut at night. And whenever a text message from his dad arrived, he stared blankly at the screen for a long time. A legal ruling could build a safe door, but learning how to breathe easily behind that door was something only time could teach. Rather than feeling like she had won, Claire felt that what she needed to protect from now on had finally become crystal clear. Richard bit his lip multiple times while the ruling was read. He argued that he had no intention of harming the child and had merely trusted bad legal advice. But his words no longer commandeered the air in the room like before. The process behind the witness statements, the audio tampering, and the circumstantial evidence of coaching the child had already been independently verified. Above all, until the very end, he spent more time defending his own intentions than addressing Leo's terror. When the judge asked if he intended to apologize to his child, Richard paused before replying that he merely needed an opportunity to clear up misunderstandings. Stepping out of the courthouse, Richard did not plead his innocence to the waiting press. The network's legal team had strictly forbidden him from making any public statements. The National Broadcasting Network suspended his appearances indefinitely pending the conclusion of their internal review, and his contract for the new program was shredded. The show, meant to highlight the voice holding a family together, was scrapped without airing a single episode. Several endorsement deals were not renewed, and his production staff faced a separate inquiry regarding how the materials he submitted were generated. Richard believed he had lost everything overnight, but in truth, the result was simply the cumulative weight of the choices he had made over many months, finally crashing down on him all at once. Dr. Jenkins could not evade responsibility either. The manipulation of her medical logs and her reliance on guardian hearsay over clinical evaluation became the subject of a medical board review, and the broadcasting consultancy project she had secured was terminated. Initially, Jenkins claimed she had simply trusted Richard's explanations, but the digital footprint proving she had fortified the records with aggressive terminology remained under her own account name. Through Marcus, she relayed that she wished to apologize to Claire in person. Claire neither refused the meeting nor accepted it. She replied that if an apology was necessary, Jenkins should first demonstrate it through her actions, by fully disclosing the facts and cooperating with the relevant board reviews. Forgiveness was not a shortcut to bypass accountability. Several witnesses, including Mrs. Miller, formally amended their previous statements. They separated what they had actually seen from the interpretations that were later written into the documents. Some had needed the money, some had feared the power of Richard and the network, and some genuinely believed Claire was unstable. Claire didn't brand all of them as villains. But just because there was fear and misunderstanding didn't mean the responsibility for signing those documents magically vanished. She did not demand public apology videos from any of them. Instead, she asked them not to sign documents that rewrote other people's memories so easily in the future. David Clark came to find Claire after the network's internal investigation wrapped up. He wasn't waiting at the old record cafe, but outside an empty, closed-down recording studio. As Claire approached, he bowed his head deeply. "I should have spoken up back then. When I realized the files were chopped up. When you were pushed out of the meetings, I should have said something was wrong. At least once." Claire didn't answer for a long time. David's data had ultimately played a crucial role, but that didn't erase his past silence. She had to differentiate between saying thank you and saying it was okay. "I am thankful you kept the raw files," Claire said. "But that doesn't mean your silence back then is suddenly okay." David nodded. "I know. I will never erase a person just to keep my seat again." Claire didn't say she believed that promise. A promise was something verified through subsequent actions. However, she learned that David was actively participating in a network committee to overhaul how producer credits and master files were managed internally. Hearing that, Claire felt a small sense of relief. If her ordeal didn't just end with one man's downfall, but left behind a system where someone's name couldn't be so easily deleted, then it meant something. The National Broadcasting Network sent Claire an offer for reinstatement. The company proposed restoring her co-creator credit on the programs she had developed and offered her the position of showrunner on a new audio documentary project. A few months ago, Claire would have viewed this offer as the sole path to reclaiming her honor. She had imagined the scene countless times, returning to the seat Richard had stolen and watching her name scroll across the credits again. But as she read the proposal, the first thing that came to mind was Leo avoiding the stares of his friends at school. If she returned to the network, people would ask about the scandal before they asked about her skills, and her child's story would follow her everywhere. Marcus told her the decision was entirely hers. However, he advised her to figure out whether turning down her career was a choice born out of fear, or a choice made for the life she truly wanted. Claire didn't reply for several days. She pulled out her old broadcast scripts, her award certificates, and the listener letters from the shows she had created. Radio was the work she loved, and she didn't want to throw that love away because of Richard. But walking back into the exact same building and the exact same corporate structure wasn't the only way forward. She began to think longer about which times voices needed to be safely preserved, rather than just broadcasting her own voice to the world. Ultimately, Claire politely declined the reinstatement offer. She accepted the correction of her producer credits, but stated she would not take the showrunner position for the new program. Instead, she applied for an oral history archiving project at a local community library in upstate New York. It involved collecting and cataloging the life stories of the elderly, the sounds of historic local markets, and the daily routines of disappearing neighborhoods. It wasn't a high-profile job, nor did it guarantee a massive salary. But there was a strict principle: no one's voice would be chopped up for sensational consumption, and every recording would remain strictly within the boundaries permitted by the speaker. Reading that principle, Claire took a deep, full breath for the first time in a long time. Leo and Claire moved to a quiet neighborhood a bit further from the center of the city. The new house was smaller than their old apartment, but Leo could walk to school, and a row of low-hanging trees lined the street beneath their windows. When told to pick his own room, Leo chose the smallest one. It was because the door was furthest from the entryway and closest to his mom's room. Claire didn't try to push the bigger room on him. Respecting the choice that made the child feel safe was the priority. The two of them taped the space map to the wall and placed the robot nightlight on a second-hand desk. Without replicating their old house exactly, familiar things found their places again. For the first few weeks, Leo checked every night to make sure Claire had locked the door. Some days he came out to the entryway twice, some days 5 times. Claire didn't rush him to go to sleep. She checked the deadbolt with him and reassured him that Mom would still be in the house tomorrow morning. At first, the child couldn't fully trust that promise, waking up multiple times before dawn. But as time passed, the number of times he checked gradually decreased. Claire didn't track that change like a clinical success rate. She didn't want to turn the days her child felt slightly less terrified into a statistic. Instead, she let him take as much time as he needed to get ready every morning. The first visitation with Richard took place briefly under the mandated conditions. From the day before, Leo complained of a stomachache, but he never explicitly said he didn't want to go. Claire explained the boundaries of his choices, assuring him that if he wanted to stop in the middle, all he had to do was say so. The moment Richard saw his son, he teared up and tried to hug him, but when Leo stepped back, he lowered his arms. In the past, Richard would have blamed that reaction on Claire's brainwashing. This time, after a brief silence, he said, "Dad will wait slowly." Claire didn't judge that a miraculous change had occurred based solely on those words. But at the very least, his first action, respecting the child's boundaries, was worth noting. After the meeting ended, Leo said he felt sorry for his dad. Claire didn't reiterate what Richard had done, nor did she block the child's pity. "You're allowed to feel that way." The boy then added that he was also scared his dad would get mad again. Claire replied in the exact same manner. "That feeling is allowed to be there too." Leo was finally beginning to understand through his own experience that you could love someone and be terrified of them at the same time. Claire never forced the child to choose just one emotion. Recovery wasn't about hating Richard completely, nor was it about forgiving him quickly. It was the process of Leo learning to feel his own emotions without needing anyone else's permission. A few weeks later, Richard sent Claire a long letter of apology. He wrote that his fear had mutated into a need for control, and admitted that he had prioritized protecting his reputation over his son's safety. He also confessed that while exploiting Claire's talents and contributions, he had gaslit her into believing she couldn't do anything without him. It was a paragraph the old Richard would never have written. But Claire had no intention of rebuilding their relationship based solely on an apology letter. She wrote 3 things in her reply. Do not demand forgiveness directly from Leo. Follow the mandated visitation conditions perfectly. Do not shift the blame for your actions onto Dr. Jenkins or the network. Richard did not ask to reconcile, and Claire left no room for the possibility. Their marriage had long ceased to be a relationship of mutual respect. Claire finalized the divorce proceedings, sorting out the assets and custody arrangements through Marcus. Whether Richard could someday become a better father depended entirely on his sustained actions. But that did not mean he was entitled to the qualification of being her husband again. Claire separated accepting an apology from returning to the way things were. Closing the door wasn't an act of revenge. It was drawing a boundary to ensure the exact same wounds wouldn't be inflicted again. The first project Claire took on at the library was archiving the sounds of an old, traditional farmer's market. The rattle of a steel storefront rolling up at dawn. The rhythmic chopping of a fishmonger. The clinking of heavy ceramic bowls in a decades-old diner. She recorded them all. She always explained to her interview subjects first that they could stop the recording at any time, and that any parts they didn't want public could be permanently deleted. At first, people found it strange that she asked for permission so many times. Claire didn't explain the detailed reasons why. She merely explained that once a voice goes out into the world, it rarely comes back to its owner, so the person speaking must hold far more power than the person recording. Leo often came to the library after school. He would quietly watch his mom wearing headphones, adjusting the audio waveforms on her monitor. One day, the boy asked, "Mom, do you still fix Dad's voice now?" Claire didn't laugh as she answered, "No. I don't fix other people's voices however I want anymore." Leo thought for a moment, then held out his smartwatch. After the trial, the device had been factory reset, with only the basic emergency functions re-enabled. The child asked if it was okay to save other sounds in it now, instead of scary ones. Claire told him that he was the one who got to choose what to record, and that if he wanted to record someone else's voice, he had to ask for their permission first. Every weekend, the two of them started collecting the sounds of their neighborhood, one by one. The first was the sound of the oven door opening at the morning bakery, and the second was the bouncing of a basketball on the school playground. Leo also saved the sound of rain drumming against the windowsill and the automated announcements on the city bus. Claire let the child name the files himself. Rainy day window, Friday bus home, mom kneading noodle dough. The storage space on the watch was small, but Leo enjoyed the process of selecting the sounds he liked and deleting the old ones. This time, not a single file was created in secret, and no one made the choices for him. Claire also launched a small sound archiving workshop for kids at the library. The children recorded the sound of flipping book pages, tying sneaker laces, and pencils rolling across desks. Claire didn't demand sad stories from the kids, nor did she pry into their family secrets. She simply let them choose the sounds they liked and the moments they wanted to remember. When one child asked if it was okay to record their parents fighting at home, Claire explained that they should first ask a safe adult for help. She made it crystal clear that recording something did not replace getting help, and that a child was never responsible for proving they were in danger all by themselves. Marcus occasionally grabbed coffee with Claire near the library. He told her that the most dangerous time is right when you feel like the case is finally over. Once the legal proceedings wrap up, everyone around you tells you to move on quickly, but the body and the relationships heal far slower than a judge's ruling. Claire agreed. Even now, there were days she felt she couldn't breathe even when she hadn't heard Richard's voice. And if Leo was running late from school, her brain instantly conjured up the worst-case scenarios. She didn't feel ashamed of those trauma responses, and she continued her own therapy. Stability wasn't a state of feeling absolutely nothing. It was a state of knowing that even when fear arrived, she wouldn't be trapped in it alone. As time flowed, Leo stopped getting into fights the second his mom was mentioned at school. If someone repeated a rumor they saw on the internet, he asked a teacher for help, or simply told the kid directly that he didn't want to answer. Claire didn't praise the boy by calling him strong. She told him specifically that his choice to ask for help was a good one, because calling a child strong could easily turn into another obligation for him to endure everything on his own. Leo slowly built up the experience of knowing that even if he cried, or even if he stopped talking, someone would remain by his side. When spring began, the two of them took a long train trip for the first time. Their destination was a small coastal town overlooking the Atlantic. Sitting by the window, Leo used his watch to record the sound of the train every time they passed through a tunnel. Claire still retained the habit of tensing up whenever the child touched the device, but this time, she didn't ask what he was doing. After emerging from a tunnel, Leo played the file and let his mom hear it. It was the heavy clacking of the wheels, growing louder in the dark, then fading away. "This isn't a scary sound," the child said. Claire nodded. "If that's how you feel, then it isn't." Walking along the ocean boardwalk, Leo recorded the sound of his mom's footsteps crunching on the gravel. Claire intentionally walked slowly, and the boy brought the watch close to his ear to check the audio. The wind was blowing hard, so the file picked up the loud rustling of their jackets more than the footsteps. Leo grumbled that it was a failure, but Claire told him they could just record it again. The old Claire would have dictated the exact angle and position to capture the perfect sound. Now, she waited for the child to delete the file he didn't like and try again on his own. The master of the record was not the listener, but the one leaving the record behind. At a local boardwalk stand, the two of them bought a warm, soft pretzel to share. Before eating, Leo tried to use his watch to record the crinkling sound of the paper bag. But fumbling with his gloved hands, he dropped the pretzel right onto the wooden planks. The boy looked up at Claire with a shocked expression, then looked down at the flattened shape of the pretzel and burst out laughing. Claire couldn't hold it in and laughed with him. Handing them a fresh pretzel, the vendor asked what was so funny. Instead of answering, Leo checked his watch screen. The file perfectly captured the crinkling of the bag, a short gasp, and the roaring laughter of the two of them. Leo didn't delete that file. He pondered for a long time over what to name it, eventually typing Mom and the dropped pretzel. Claire didn't correct his spelling. Clasping the watch back onto his wrist, the child asked, "Mom, is it okay if I keep this sound for a really long time?" Claire smiled. "If you want to keep it." Leo turned off the screen and grabbed his mother's hand. In the past, that same watch had been an object he used to prove to adults that he was terrified. Now, inside, it lived failed recordings, the sound of the wind, the bakery, the train, and his mother's footsteps. On the train ride back home, Leo leaned his head against his mom's shoulder and fell asleep. Watching the lights blur past the window in the dark, Claire remembered the version of herself that used to stay up all night trying to make Richard's voice sound flawless. Back then, she believed that crafting a voice people trusted was the way to change the world. Now, she knew that refusing to alter someone's voice, and listening to it all the way to the very end, was far more difficult and far more important. She hadn't gained a famous television program or a glamorous comeback. Instead, she had gained a home where her child didn't have to hide his fear, and a quiet job she had chosen under her own name. Claire noticed the screen of the watch on the sleeping boy's wrist light up briefly. At the very top of the saved files list was the title he had made today. She didn't touch the screen. That sound belonged entirely to Leo, and exactly when he would listen to it was entirely up to him to decide. As the train slowly pulled into the next station, Leo squeezed his mother's hand a little tighter in his sleep. Claire didn't pull her hand away, simply waiting for the darkness outside the window to pass. That day, for the first time, Leo's watch stored laughter instead of fear.